would love to be with you at Camp Wilderness. I love this camp. I love this camp. And I know you would not be here for everyone that you come from. I had planned to be there, but spoke in Las Vegas on June 1st and July 1st, came home with COVID and had to be hospitalized for 7 days in isolation. Not fun. You don't want to do that. So I got out of the isolation 3 weeks ago and decided I really should not make the trip to northern Minnesota. So I would have been there with you if I could have been, because I think that this lady is the oldest camper of Camp Wilderness. Bill Living. This camp. And I tell you, I was there when I was 6, 7, 8, and 9, 4 or 5 years, I'm not sure, summers. And so you can picture the road, you turn from Park Rapids, and you take that road, and then you turn left to go into Wilderness under that nice big sign. Well, the very first year, there was a very interesting neighbor. And the neighbor was very angry about Wilderness Camp being built. He did not want this to happen. And well, my father, Virgil Asbury Reed, Boy Scout executive for what was then the Northern Lights Council. He had an amazing charismatic personality. And his main goal was to make friends with this angry neighbor. And he did. And he said to that angry neighbor, I'm going to need your help. I don't know where to build this road. And I'm going to need your help. Oh, I can help you with that. It's got to be on the high ridge, right here. This is where it's going to be. So the angry neighbor became a friend. And that's kind of a scouting thing, isn't it? To make friends and to bring peace and joy and love to the world. But my father and mother, Ellen Reed, my brother, Dr. Omar Reed, who then became a very famous dentist, actually, he was 12 years old, 6 years older than I was, eventually became an Eagle Scout, and then 10 other Scouts. And we all came on this little corner and started to hike down to Van X Lake. About, I think, my brother thought it was about a 4-mile hike, I'm not sure. But we carried our packs with us and started a camp on the beach of Van X Lake. And that's where we spent the first summer. My mother was the cook for this group. Can you imagine being the cook for a group on the beach of Van X Lake for a summer? They had tents, and they dug a hole with stone to make deep holes in the refrigerator. And that was how they started their camp experience. They also not only decided where that road was going to go, but they also planted trees on site and did other things to improve the property. Eventually, they named one of the lakes Reed Lake, and I think you probably know about Reed Lake. And then eventually, you even honored my dad by naming the little chapel, the Virgil Reed Chapel in the Pines. Now, my dad, I'll talk to you about my dad. He was a constant scholar, and yet he had to be a Boy Scout. But my brother was an Eagle, and he helped him with all those things. And he loved scouting, and was, of course, a Boy Scout. Tremendous personality. But he also had a deep spiritual faith. And this was during World War II. And during World War II, the chaplains in the service were the Jewish people, their leaders, Catholic priests, the denominational pastors. They called those kind of people into the service to be chaplains, and they left the churches with no speakers, no pastors. So they ordained my dad as a lay pastor, and he was a pastor in a little Methodist church also every Sunday morning. So that was kind of a fun thing, and as a result of that, I took some of his sermons and wrote with response to those sermons, and that was special for me. Now, the Boy Scout camp, Wilderness, I'm not sure where the name Wilderness came from, except that it was the wilderness. It was absolutely the wilderness. But this little group, this little motley group on that beach, loved that summer and the privilege of starting the camp. My dad had a truck, and every couple of days he would drive that truck into Park Rapids. And of course, back then, no seat belts. We could just hop in the back of the truck and go to Park Rapids. And the first stop was always the bakery. And they would give us fresh homemade bread and rolls, and this little round face didn't happen accidentally. I loved going into Park Rapids and going to the bakery. And then we would go and get what my dad called the supplies. So we'd get our supplies. And then we would go to Schmieder's and have an ice cream sundae. Anyone been to Schmieder's for an ice cream sundae years ago? Someone? Oh, that is so much fun. So that was my beginning of the Scout camp. Now, I did point out the spiritual part of my dad, and that's why the chapel in the Pines is rightly named after my dad. But there's also another thing that's significant. It's a story that probably has never been told. Certainly the stories about the campfires, and my dad would put on a headdress and an Indian blanket and tell stories at the campfires and do all the things that you have done at campfires. And those scouting campfires are so important to our lives. But there was another little story. Every evening, our family of 4 would do something unique. My father had carved another little path up into the woods a ways, and he made a little fire, star fire, and put 4 logs around the star fire. And at a certain time each evening, when the camp was quiet, our family of 4 would go to that little location, and we would have a closing day of being thankful. And it was a wonderful part of my life. Now, we didn't sit on all 4 of those logs. My mother and dad sat on one, my brother sat on one, and I sat on one. My dad said we left the other one for the Holy Spirit. He said, I learned that from an Indian guide, that you leave one log for God. So that was our experience at Camp Wilderness. And then, of course, as the years went by, they built, the camp started to grow and build. But I think I'm the oldest living camper from Camp Wilderness from those early days. Now, I did send a video, and I'm sorry it did not come. And I'm not sure what I would have said. It might have been just wonderful. But I have given you a little bit of a story of the beginnings of the camp and the character that built the camp. I do have a question for you, because I think it's interesting for you to think a lot about why you're here and what your experience in wilderness was. So my question for you is, when you turn off the road and you start to drive on the road down into the camp, and you see those words, and a scout is trustworthy, obedient and kind, and all of those words, what do you think? Do you think I'm involved in a worthy cause? This is a crazy world. We can't fix Afghanistan today. We can't fix the border problem today. But we can help one scout today. We can help one person today by giving them kindness, by inspiring them to be obedient, to be trustworthy, to be the kind of a person that would even get an Eagle Scout. I have done a lot of speaking to HR people, and if you have Eagle Scout on your, with your all the things that you've done in your life, woo, that stands out, and people trust it because it means something. It means that you have an attitude of integrity, an attitude of hard work, an attitude of caring about the earth and people and friends, and that you'll be a good employee. So that's my background, and I would be glad to answer any questions you might have. This, of course, is the Scout book that came out a few years ago, the Green Book. And I'm privileged to be in the Green Book a couple of times. In fact, many times, because we sent a lot of pictures of the early camp. This particular picture is me holding the birch bark plaque that has all the names of the first campers. And that was in the trading post for a number of years, and it was given to me as a gift about 15 years ago. And of course, it's coming back to Wilderness, and it will be in the history area so that other people can see the names on that birch bark plaque. And yes, my name's on there. You'll be read just very little printed name for a 6-year-old. So that's kind of fun. But this book is fabulous. So if you do not have a copy of this book, I really encourage you to get one. Whoever did it did an amazing job of the pictures and etc. Now I will tell you, as you're thinking about whether you have a question, I will tell you about an experience a number of years ago. I came to speak about maybe it was the 65th anniversary of Wilderness. Could be, or the 60th, I'm not sure. And we brought our 8th grade Boy Scout, Titus Rohde. And Titus was an 8th grader from Washington State, basketball player, excellent student. And Scotty, well, he kind of was thinking he was taking 2nd place. And he thought, you know what, I'm going to play basketball in high school and I want to get great grades. And so I kind of maybe I'll just give up Scotty. So we brought him from Washington to Camp Wilderness to be there while we were celebrating that weekend. And he became very involved. He had opened his eyes, and there was a service in the Virgil Reed Chapel in the Pines, and they asked him to close in prayer, and he did. And it was just really fun to see him come alive. We got in the car, they headed back to Minneapolis for the airport, and he said, you know what? I'm going to be an Eagle Scout. And he became an Eagle Scout. So in the front of my Green Book, I have a picture of Titus and my dad. Because certainly it was because of my dad that eventually he had a grandson that became an Eagle Scout because he went to Wilderness and he saw how incredible Scouting really was and wanted to be a part of it. So, do you realize, as a speaker, how it is to look at an audience with masks on? There's someone, I just know you are. And having lived in Minnesota much of my early life, I know you're wonderful people. In fact, I have to give up. People have been bringing us food as I recover from COVID. And one gal was a Minnesota gal, and she brought me tater tot casserole. It's a Minnesota thing, tater tot casserole. So I know you're there behind your mask. And I know you're in love with this camp like I am. So if you have any questions that I can possibly answer, and this camp is a wonderful camp. And it was started by a family, the Reed family. And they were really passionate about what they were doing. And they gave that passion on to me. Now my brother, who became an Eagle Scout, and a wonderful dentist, died a year ago. And I said to him, you know, tell me the stories of the early camp, because you were there as an older person than I was, and he told me many wonderful stories and friends that he had kept in touch with for all these years. So, what are you thinking sitting there in that wonderful, wonderful place? Anyone want to ask me a question or make a comment or come to Arizona? I'm looking at you wearing jackets and I'm thinking, okay, I would love to wear a jacket again, but I guess that will happen in October. Okay, so what do you think? Anyone want to ask a question?
Naomi, This is John Stern. I was at the 60th and I got my picture taken with you. It's one of the highlights of that event. But my question is, when you left here, when Virgil left here as camp director, where did he go and what was the rest of his career?
Okay, well, first of all, my dad started out as got his master's in education in North Dakota. He was a principal, he was superintendent of schools in North Dakota, and then we moved to Fargo, and he was actually the principal of Fargo Business College. And that's where he learned about the position as a Boy Scout executive. And so he served with Northern Lights Council, which was not called that at that point. And I don't remember how long he was there, but then he was transferred to the St. Paul Area Council. So we moved to South St. Paul, and my dad was there for, let's see, 7, 8, 3 years. And then he was transferred to Phoenix Council and loved the camp that they have here in Arizona. We were only here 9 months. And he had a massive stroke and died at age 51.
Wow.
So that was very, very hard for me. Now, I know that this isn't a spiritual, a conclave, so I need to be a little sensitive, but I will tell you, you're going to think, oh, this woman's crazy. She's crazy. I have to tell you, he died on Good Friday. So on Sunday morning, I thought, okay, he was such a wonderful person. I thought maybe it'll be the second one who comes. But really, I realized that he was with the Lord, and that was wonderful. So he was 51, and I was just almost 13, and my mother was sick at the time, and she died 10 years later. So my brother and I needed to be very resourceful in putting ourselves through college, and on to a good life. A really good life. So that's my dad's tenure in scouting, and 3 places, Fargo, South St. Paul, and Phoenix. Good question, thanks.
So what did you use for water back in 1946?
It's good to see you again. Good to see you above your mask. Anyone else have a question?
Yes.
Would you love to be with us on that beach that summer?
What did you use for water back in 1946 out of your camp?
Boy, I do not know what we did for water. I really don't. What do scouts do for water when they don't have it? I'm sure there was a distillation system of some kind that used the lake water. That would be my guess, but I'm not in that arena of knowledge, so I'm not sure. I do know that there were many famous guests that year that came and said, what is this all about? And their names are on the virtual plaque also, the ones that were visitors and guests. So it's an interesting thing and the picture, of course, is in the Green Book. And there's so many stories in the Green Book about every single decade, but you're going to have a day filled with how in the world did this camp progress to where it is now. And so it's going to be a fun day. I would love to be there with you, just love to be there with you. Anyone else have a question?
Yes.
No.
What was the weather like the week you were there? What was the weather like your week?
There were mosquitoes. As I remember, the weather was lovely. It was lovely. And we loved the beach. And I don't know how the Boy Scouts felt when I was 6 years old. But on occasion, I think, I just had to be careful. Out of sight every once in a while. I would disappear. So those boys could have the privacy of just being scouts without a little rule wondering what they were doing. But it's amazing that I was that young, age 6, 7, 8, 9, and I remember it so well. It is really remember it well. But the weather was nice, and I think what my dad saw was that he could be a pioneer to plant an imprint of the camp, where things would be, where the road would be, and where the paths would be, where the buildings would be built, where the everything was imprinted in that first summer. So I think the first summer was probably very, very important as a beginning. So, good question. If nobody else has a question, I'll wait another minute and I'll turn it back to you all, and you can have a fabulous day. I hope you like me. That would be fun, because maybe we wouldn't have to wear masks. But I'll tell you that COVID is no fun. It was pretty tough. I almost didn't make it. So I'm extremely thankful to be alive and to be home with my family. Jim and I have been married for 64 years. He's an amazing man. We started a dental company, Smart Practice, a dental medical company, which we passed on to the family members. We've been speakers for 45 years. I was on an airplane almost every weekend for 42 years. Spoken in every state and 17 countries. So travel was in my bones. I don't know, maybe it all started on that 4-mile hike down to the beach.
Right.
So it's been a good life. We have 3 children, we have 12 grandchildren, and we just had our 6th great-grandchild. We have 3 dentists in the family. We have a couple of physicians, a lawyer, some businessmen, and a scout, a good scout, and we're proud. Are you done with the oath? You aren't always going to be alive, and neither am I. And are we going to be leaving money to workers so that it can continue to grow? I'm sure you would answer yes to that, as I have. Thank you very much, and have a wonderful day.
On the staff later in 1979, at a later period on Beaver Hill, okay. And also my partner from the Chuck Wagon, and I'll introduce him more formally after a little bit. I want to keep a few crib notes here. Because one of the things that went with looking back at those days with the Chuck Wagon and the earliest days with the camp was trying to sort out how did that fit into my life, what was going on at that time. Well, when I had finished my high school freshman year, I was a camper. I went as a camper to a camp over near Detroit Lakes called Shawendossie. How many of you know of Shawendossie? Oh, good, look at it. And as I understand, now I'm going to make some statements that are sort of as I understand it, so if somebody can correct me, please do. As I understand it, that was 1948, that summer, and that was the last summer of Shawendossie. And I remember Shawendossie being, I remember the lake, and it seemed to me there was a highway running through it, so it was not, and it wasn't a huge area, so it was a definite difference when we came here, which I'll talk about in just a moment. But in 1949, then, I came as a camper to, as I understand it, the first year of this camp, when Wilderness Camp was beginning. Lloyd Ugrin was the camp director at the time, great camp director. I appreciated him. You have no idea what it's like being on staff if you have really good camp director, and he was splendid. Able to move, change, adjust to things as they were happening, an innovator, and able to help and introduce some things into the camp that were interesting, didn't necessarily last a long time, and all ideas don't necessarily go on a long time. But anyway, an idea person, along with others too, that were active and interested at that time. Came as a camper the first year. And I remember Lloyd standing up at one of the meals, and he'd give announcements, like camp directors always have to do. And he was telling, so it still rings in my ears, about coming up into these areas before there were roads and buildings and all of that, and looking at this, there was a prospect of becoming their new camp, 2,000 acres. It was just enough to, you could tell the feeling that he had about this kind of a change coming to scouting for our area, for our district and council. So he was expressing that enthusiasm for it, and I was catching it as a kid coming here as a camper. So during the year, 50 would be the first summer that I came here. And during that school year, I would have been a junior in high school. The former director, his name was Johnson. If anybody can help me with his first name, I would appreciate it. But he was a director for the camp maybe 1 or 2 years. I don't know how long. But he came and talked to me at the school and suggested that in my school at Morris, and said, I would like to have you come and be on the staff as a dishwasher. So I said, okay, and so I was, doing various summer things and wasn't attached, so I said, okay, and I came here, and there's another fellow from Moorhead, and he and I were the dishwasher. We're doing as many as 200 dishes a meal, but you had dipping them in all this 180-degree weather, water, and all of that sort of thing. So I guess there was a certain responsibility for that kind of particular job, and I was just gradually appreciating it. But anyway, that summer I worked here, and then and I noticed there were groups going out. There was a chuck wagon going out. There was pack saddle going out. There were some canoes going out on trips around, and so this kind of intrigued us. And one of the great things about being a dishwasher is after the noon meal, by 2 o'clock in the afternoon, you were all done. You had your dishes all done from 2 till 6 or until the dishes started coming in again. You had time, and so you had a chance to go out and take a look at some horses and different things like that. And during the course of that summer, I got intrigued with this thing called chuck wagon. And I thought, well, that sounds kind of interesting. And there was a man who was at the head of it, and I looked and I could not, and maybe somebody can tell if they can. I don't remember who the man was that was directing it, but I was interested in what he was doing. And so at the end of that summer, when I was a dishwasher, I asked Lloyd, could I apply for being an assistant guide and he said, okay, and I got it. I was told, okay, I would come on as assistant guide the following summer. So that would have been the summer that I was a high school senior, right after I was a high school senior. And it was 1950 now. And I came to there, and so we always came 2 weeks early, and we helped to maybe open a couple of new camp areas or do about 2 weeks of work as people on the staff. There's probably you guys still do that here and now, I'm sure. And anyway, I came on, talked to Lloyd, sat down with Lloyd, and Lloyd, he says, I got something to tell you. The fellow that was coming as the guide for the chuck wagon has announced that he is unable to come. You are now the head guide on the chuck wagon trip. Oh, I hardly knew the front end from the back end of the horse. And they were putting me on as the guide. And they put a fellow with me. Oh, well, do you remember, Doug, the last name? It's a name like that, Hogard or something like that. And a young farm boy. And he was as ill-equipped for this thing as I was, you know. But the thing he had going for him, he was a farm boy, and I was not a farm boy. And so at least he knew what a horse looked like, you know. So anyway, we went into it. And we soldiered through together that summer, this fellow and I, and I guess in spite of mistakes that we made as we went, we learned as we went, and Lloyd was very, Lloyd Ogren was very patient with us. You know, we had to learn things from scratch. For example, you know, if you take all the harness off a Belgian stallion and throw it on the ground, you'll spend about 2.5 hours the next morning untangling the mess. And we learned that the first time we did it, and the second time we learned that we run our arm carefully through the whole arrangement of harness, lay it carefully over a log, so that in the morning you're ready to pick it up and throw it over the stallion again and get him out. So it was that kind of stupid things that we were doing and learning as we went, and Lloyd was patient with us. I mean, of course, he didn't always know every things that were going on out on the trail, but some things anyway. And he was patient with us, and we were learning gradually. Well, then we soldiered through that summer, 50. Now we're into 51, and the new partner that was given to me to be a guide with me was this gentleman right over here. His name is Gene Price, and he was a gem. He was a gem. It was a golden thing for me to be able to get Gene as a partner, and I am so grateful for the fact that he's been able to come and be here all the way from Atlanta. He lives now to be. And I'm going to let him say more after a bit. I won't say more right at the moment. So in 51, we were on our first year, and when I was after my freshman year in college, Gene and I partnered together, and then in 53 he came back and joined us again, and we partnered then for that summer. Now, at the end of that summer, or at the end of that year that followed, I realized I wasn't going to be able to come back to Wilderness. I was going into a summer stock theater, and so I wrote to Lloyd, apologized, said, I'm afraid I won't be able to come back. Well, he wrote back, and of course this is part of the mystery that kind of sticks in my mind now and really kind of came through to me now as I was preparing for coming here about what was happening at the camp. Because Lloyd wrote back immediately and said, please, Jim, we want you to come. We want to make you an area director on Beaver Hill. And I wrote back again, and I apologized, and I said, I appreciate so much, you know, but I cannot come. But so I didn't come back to the camp again on staff. And the best I could do was to have a son come back in 1979 and be a part of the staff. But the thing that stuck in my mind now in the last few days, I've been thinking about it. Why did he say Beaver Hill? And why didn't he say, we want you back, Jim, as a director or as a guide for the chuck wagon? And I guess the estimate that I make now is that the year of 1953, that summer was the last summer of the chuck wagon. And was probably the last summer, and this is estimates, but probably the last summer of the pack saddle, probably the last summer of the canoe trips. The trip process that had been so alive and active in Lloyd's time was probably ending then. And you know, maybe not everybody agreed with it. I don't know what all went on, but it probably ended. So it was kind of a glorious 3-4 years that went on there for a few years, and then it ended. Okay, just a word about the chuck wagon itself. What in the world happened to the chuck wagon? You roll this wagon up to the kitchen on Sunday afternoon. And Sunday afternoon, you also meet all the new boys coming in. They're coming in registering for chuck wagon. Chuck wagon was the initial trip. This was the youngest boys. And you kind of graduated from chuck wagon when you got a year older into pack saddle, and then a year older into canoeing. And so that we registered the boys, met them, chatted with them, got to know them a little bit. And Sunday afternoon, later in the afternoon, we rolled our wagon up to the kitchen door, and John, the cook, helped us. We prepared what food we wanted. He helped us getting these number 10 cans full of this and that and soup and whatever it is that you had for different meals. And somehow we figured out a menu and the amount of food that was needed. And we stocked up this kitchen that we had in the back of the wagon that opened up from the outside, and we stocked all the shelves. Monday morning, off we went. The boys, said goodbye to the campers or whatever, and off we went hiking. One of us hiking with the boys, and the other driving the wagon. These 2 Belgian stallions that had been lent to us by a local farmer for those number of years, and pulling the wagon. And this is peanuts for these 2. They've been pulling cows all their lives, and now they were pulling this wagon that would have all of the boys' gear in it. The boys did not need to be carrying packs, and that's kind of helpful to know about it. But off we went, and we went often on approximately the same route the wagon did, but sometimes we were, as walkers, hikers, were able to take some side trips and things, and be off. The wagon, of course, had to stay where it could move. The wagon was sometimes moving through the forest. Sometimes it was on county roads going up into Paul Bunyan State Park, state forest. And when we got out, we started out Monday morning, and about the middle of the morning, or partway into the morning, we arrived at Boardman. You all know where Boardman is. And we stopped, and we have a duty list. There's a duty list that says, dishwasher and fire builder and wood chopper and cook and so forth. And they all have numbers on. We made this thing up with numbers. So we lined the boys up, tallest one to the shortest one. Number them off, 1, 2, 3, 4, up to 9 or whatever it was that were along. And then we pair up 1 and 9 together, 2 and 8, and it worked out pretty good that way. The tall guys tended to be a little bit more knowing what was going on. The shortest guys tended to be ones that needed more help. And it worked out pretty good. So they'd be a cook, or one day they'd be a cook, the next day they'd be a dishwasher, and that kind of thing in a rotation. So off we went, and we camped then. Each night along the way, usually up in the Paul Bunyan State Forest. Nice spots. Some of them were old CCC camps that were vacant now, and they were wonderful places that we had for bringing the wagon in, camping. So then, activities we had in the afternoon, but then in the evening was campfire. And I want to get to my partner now in just a moment, because a campfire, just picture it a little bit. We're sitting around, darkness is kind of settled on, down around us. The boys have all got their tents pitched around behind them, and you can see the glow of the fire a little bit on their faces as you look around and realize these boys are pretty young. Some of them have never been away from home before, and certainly not out in a setting like this. And they're kind of looking, they're facing toward the fire, toward to us, whatever we're doing, we're singing maybe, or we're doing this or that. And all of a sudden then we said, now folks, it's time for a story. And so at that point, we had our great storyteller with us. And this is this gentleman over here. And and when the boys were kind of all settled and ready with their tummies full of the supper and ready to kind of settle down for the evening, why, I would say, and here he is.
I came to Wilderness a couple times as a camper, and then did the canoe trail once, and one of the jamborees. That was my qualification to get invited to join Jim as his assistant. I lived in Moorhead at the time, and so I had a pretty good dose of a good troop in Moorhead, and good enough that they sponsored my trip to the Jamboree and like that. So I came with enthusiasm, but even more than Jim, zero horse experience. We're talking monster animals, you know. Anyway, I had a lot of ropes to learn, but from the Jamboree experience and like that, I had learned campfire lore. So every evening, as Jim said, we'd do little campfires, and we'd coach our kids up so that when we got to the Friday night all campfire, they were all primed to do the state song with us, for example. And personal experience. I learned a little skit that I repeated many times, and even in high school I used it at one of their talent shows, and it had a good chunk of changing my life. You know, kids that didn't know me, oh yeah, you're that guy. So, howdy kids, coming around. It's time for another thrilling episode of The Texas Stranger, brought to you by Sago Cereals. Now, Sago Cereals doesn't snap, crackle, or pop. It just lies there in the bottom of the dish. But you can put peaches and cream on Sago, fresh sliced strawberries or bananas. But you just can't kill the taste. But now, on with The Texas Stranger. As you remember, Tex had just entered a small cow town when he was accosted by a tall wrangler. Howdy, stranger. Howdy, stranger. You a stranger in these parts? Stranger? Hey, yeah, I'm a stranger in these parts. Well, what's your name, stranger? Ah, my name's Tex, stranger. Oh, your name's Tex. Then you all must hail from Texas, stranger. No, I don't hail from Texas. I'm from Louisiana. Louisiana? Then how come they named you Tex? They couldn't have named me Louise, could they? And tune in again tomorrow for another thrilling episode of The Texas Stranger. And remember, Sagu is like a good man, and you can't keep a good man down. This is the first time back in a long time. As he said, I'm out of Atlanta. It's a little different there. But I'm so lucky to have had what I did with Jim and with Wilderness, the jamborees. Made a big difference to me, and I know it probably has for all of you. Thanks.
Before you sit down, could you tell how we move toward Good Friday to Friday at the end of September?
Oh, I don't want to lose that. As I said, we primed the kids at our own little campfires, and then I really feel like the Friday night all camp campfire. The Chuck Wagon kids owned the campfire. Jim and I would get out and lead the songs and do our little shticks. We even had I had a cat gun that I brought along. And I couldn't find it before I came here. I even found the caps, but no cat gun. Anyway, part of the cowboy shtick was I'd introduce him as world's greatest handgun shot, revolver shot. And so he'd show it, and I'd say, first shot, fairly difficult, fairly straightforward, simple shot. And I had a mouse trap. And I'd hold a cracker up in it, and he'd shoot, bang, and pop, the cracker would explode. Now, that was a fairly straightforward shot, but we'll do a little more difficult. He's gonna bounce or ricochet a shot off the rock outside the campfire and hit the cracker. So he shoots, bang. We have someone stationed out there with a pie tin and a spoon. Pop goes the cracker. And we milked that one more time. This time 2 ricochets. One off that rock, the other one off the head of the main building, and then back and hit the cracker. So I got to stand this way. And so he bing, dong. So we had fun doing that, and as I say, it's still stuck with me. That routine is in there. Oh, wait. He wasn't alone then, but I got to. This is Merlin. Merlin, come here, show up.
Yeah, but there was another gentleman that was the Chuck Wagon leader, and actually in that green, I think in that green little history, there's a picture of the guy by the Chuck Wagon, but I don't know his name. So he had the first year, and Gene and I and husband, we were not picture takers. There was not single picture taken of those 3 years. So that's crazy. We could have, but we didn't.
Well, I think the first time I was in Wilderness was probably 63, 64, something like that. I've been 8, 9, if I remember it all.
Yeah.
But I've been here a number of times in between, but probably up to 70, 76, something like that.
And they had CITs at the time. Do you still have them?
Yes.
Counselors in training, they called them. They were not paid any money. The dishwashers were paid something. Yeah, but, and then there were counselors besides them. Now, whether, I think they might have been paid a little bit. Is that still true? Okay.
Yeah. Neither of us mentioned another site that brought me to Wilderness several times besides just as a camper was for the tree planting sections where tractors cut little grooves through fairly places clearing that needed reforestation, and they give you a little spade and a bucket full of seedlings, and you put the seedling, stop it shut, and step on and make another one. And
I remember some of that.
yeah, I think
Did that-
not
did that
elegant,
myself.
but it's successful.
Did that myself in 1959.
Did you?
Yeah,
Okay.
for Campery up here, 59.
Yeah.
My little pine trees up north.
All right, is there any more questions for them, or should we move on to the next?
Resolution of the cracker, how did you work that? I know the logistics of putting it up, but who got their fingers stuck on the cracker?
I did find and bring along the mousetrap, but I don't have it with me. But you know, it's a little
Yeah.
board about that time. You pull down the spring as though you're setting it,
Right.
and you can hold the cracker around the board and just like go with it, the thing, you know, release the trap, and it'll just
My fingers take it.
It's a good gimmick. Because, you know, the first time, especially kids, but first time anyone sees it, they don't expect the cracker to do something. So pop's nice and, whoa, great shot.
And tell the opening that you often gave to a campfire story before you told it. Years ago.
Oh, yeah. You know, I was a great fan for the Lone Ranger. So when I learned that, I was ready.
Beats.
Return with us now to the thrilling days of yesteryear. From out of the past come the thundering hoofbeats, etc.
And the one I remember him saying, years ago in the ancient Orient, is the way he'd tell the story. He was a good storyteller. Yeah.
I've got a question, or Daryl's related question, I see you're part of it live. Do you remember where we are told and shown north of Buck Lake, there's a pit where there was an arrow that was part of the ceremonial grounds. Do you recall your ordeal and where that might have been?
It was in Mandan, North Dakota. Indian Mound.
Oh, okay, so you were with Channawappi?
Yeah.
Okay, I got it. Okay.
Steve, that's where I had my ordeal, up there.
Okay, so it was still, even
Yep.
when you were,
And the
And one guy
pit, they
like
filled
you.
the pit with fire. It was pretty darn dramatic. And then it rained buckets that night.
I don't know, I can't imagine they're doing the blood part of the ordeal anymore.
We did it then.
They did it then. Brother?
Time,
Yeah, we see.
the Murphys and John Rowell. We started at camp almost when Nome started. And you guys, our grandpa brought us up to camp when we were about 4 years old, when I was 4 and you were 2, back in the early 50s. our grandfather was one of the founders of camp. In the 30s, he was staying over at Isle of Dreams on the hottest summer in the history of this area.
1936.
Yeah. And he looked across at what became Camp Wilderness. It had been logged off 50 years before or something like that. Then a fire had swept through the area in the 20s, I think. And it was nothing but scrub. No trees left, just scrub. And Grandpa said to himself, you know, that would be a great place for a Boy Scout camp. You know, Shawandassi was, our dad went to Shawandassi, and we were outgrowing Shawandassi, and so 9 years later, 1945, the camp was established with
Sage.
Virgil Reed.
Do you mind if I interject,
Go ahead.
John? And actually, family lore has it that Dad, the reason why Dad and Grandpa came to Isle of Dreams to stay there, business was so bad in 1936, it was so hot, they decided, well, all right, they'll go to Isle of Dreams. And legend has it that Grandpa stood in the water at Isle of Dreams to cool off, and supposedly he pointed to camp. Like this.
Like Babe Ruth, you know?
Yeah,
and-
that's the family lore, and then kind of went about making it happen.
He came over and walked around the waterfront and waded out in the water. Grandpa didn't swim, was wading out in the water just very carefully, boom, that drop off. And,
What was the other one? Boardman, wasn't he along?
Yeah.
The one that they named Boardman Lake
Yeah.
after was another one of the founders.
And Doc Baker was part of
Yes.
all of that group too. I went to camp as a camper, and I was trying to think of it last night. It started in 1958, 59, 60, and 61. I got my 61 patch here, and 62. And then I worked in camp in 63, went to the Jamboree in 64, and then came back to work in 65. My first year at camp on staff, I was little, just short. I was maybe like 4 feet 3 inches tall or something like that. And since Grandpa was the merchant in the family around here, they stuck me in the trading post. So I worked in the trading post. My big memory of working in the trading post is loading the pop machine and getting sick on grape pop. I haven't had grape pop since. Went to the Jamboree the next year, and then the year after that, Scout Craft Aid. Back in those days, the Scout Craft Aid taught cooking, first aid, all the skills you needed to get your second class and your first class badges. I can remember teaching signaling, semaphore.
Oh, I remember, yeah.
A, B, C, D, E. What's that good for now? Absolutely nothing. But I remember drilling it in. By the end of the summer, I could send a message pretty easily with flags. Our campcraft site was just about where the tower is now, the forest tower. I'd get up just, the bell for breakfast would ring, and I would, I lived all summer in a tent at the site, and I'd get out of bed and just make it to breakfast. The bell would wake me up and I'd go to breakfast. OA was very active back then. I don't know if it's active now. By the way, the only time I get to wear my uniform is when I come to camp and get to talk with folks like you. It's kind of interesting. I sewed this on 2 nights ago, and I sewed this on 2 nights ago. I was going through the box of all of the Scout stuff that I have. Found these old patches and put them on. I've got some of your old patches, by the way. So tell some stories.
Say, all right, talked about how we were able to go, why we got to go to the Jamboree. Rewards, remember?
Rewards for advancing to the next level. I was a Life Scout, and we had to each move up one rank. So I got my Eagle, and it was presented to me, the campfire, the night before we left for the Jamboree on the trains.
From Moorhead Legion Park.
That was quite an experience.
What was Mom wearing?
She was wearing a yellow pants. I have this vision in my head of what my mother was wearing that night. It was quite good.
Well, and I was the one that kind of tailed behind. I'm glad John clarified. To this very day, everybody thinks I'm the oldest, just because for whatever reason, I kind of looked a little more like Grandpa, a little older, and John got to look like our mother, and with a little fuller head of hair that I was blessed with. But John is much older. I've been fighting this. He's 18 months older, if anybody wants to know. But I had to go from first class to star, and so it was memorable. But John talked about the trading post. My time at camp was, I worked at the trading post, and my big memory of the trading post, outside of having just so much fun, was it was a hot summer, that summer of 65. That's when I worked. And we sold so much pop, and there was a big competition between the two pop companies. I don't know if it was Pepsi and Coke. We had two machines, and so they started giving out bigger portions of the pop, and we couldn't keep up with the pop. We couldn't keep it cold. So I thought would be a good idea. Of course, it happened to be the night before the big camp inspections, which I think we still have. The National comes in, does the big inspections. I turned the pop machines to make them colder. And of course, overnight, all the pop bottles froze and exploded. And we got pop all over the floor of the trading post when we came in, and holy buckets, was that a mess. Now there was a rumor going around that I had pushed over the pop machine to make it explode, but that wasn't true. I admit that it was my fault, because I thought, well, we'll make it cool a little faster. I didn't realize you could make those pop machines into coolers. But just coming to camp almost every summer of our lives, and we still try to make it up here. When you get here, you breathe, you kind of smell that air when you get here, and then and as much as camp has changed with all the new buildings and everything else, it's still the same. It's still the same to us. I mean, it still always was. This little kid's a magical place, but of course, John and I, all growing up, whenever we were here with Grandpa, walking around, it was, he was known, and it was a little.
It was that one summer when Grandpa went for a walk and got a little lost.
Well, he was berry picking.
Yeah.
Berry picking. He got lost. He was probably 80s, maybe.
Yeah, I expect.
Yeah, he was out hiking around.
Were your father and your grandfather both scouts themselves?
Well, not
Dad was.
Dad was. He made it to life, just like me.
Then he got interested in our mother.
Well, Dad wasn't a strong swimmer, and that was my nemesis too. Life-saving merit badge was, back then, that was a requirement for Eagle Scout, and since John was an Eagle Scout, I kind of figured I didn't have to be. I didn't want to be just like him, so I.
But there's a later story. Rick and I were in an airport in Chicago, I think, about the time when some kids were going to the jamboree and they were all in their uniforms, and a number of them were Eagles and a number of them were Life Scouts. And Rick goes up to him and says,
I give him the speech, I tell him my story about going through scouts, being a Life Scout and not pushing forward. And I said, you know, when you get Eagle Scout when you're like 16, it means something. But I'll tell you what, when you get to be your age, it really means something. And then and the same when you're a Life Scout at 16, that's a good accomplishment. But then when you're older, you think, man, if I would have just worked, if I just pushed forward, I could have been an Eagle Scout. And in my life, you know, we all have regrets. But man, that's my biggest regret. You know, I'm still a fine person. I'm just not an Eagle Scout, and there's somebody that rubs it in all the time. Plus the fact that we have 3 nephews that are Eagle Scouts, a cousin, my uncle, Eagle Scout.
Yeah, wait, the first time I met you about 30 years ago, you told me that 30 years ago. I always remember that.
Yeah, it's only gotten worse.
why don't you guys get up and say a few things
Yes.
about our era?
You started in the dining hall,
Yeah.
John, didn't you? You were the maitre d', as I recall.
No, I was a dining hall steward.
All right.
And if you look in the dining hall today, you'll see signs indicating that a scout is clean. Part of the responsibility of a table waiter was not just to bring food to the table, but to clean up after everyone else had left. And the signal for everybody to get up and leave was, you're all dismissed with the exception of the table waiters. And the scouts would chant that as a body. And then our exchange scout in 1968 was Swedish. And so then it became, Vi kan gå allihopa utom de som serverar. Scouts tried that and did it with some success. But the other thing I can say, and Rick, you were talking about life-saving merit badge. Every Friday, when they were doing their final exam, I was one of the victims, and I tried to make it as difficult as possible. Just impossible to put me in a cross chest to carry and bring me to shore, but I think everyone passed in the end.
Were you the one with the scuba, the oxygen tank down below?
That was me.
And the victims would go down and stay down for a long time, but holy cow, maybe he really is drowned.
That was the trick.
I know it was
You do a surface dive and get under the water and swim, probably 15, 20 feet away from where you were last sighted. Okay, now try to find me.
Yeah.
It was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
John? Yes?
Do you remember the on Dale Street?
Yes, you are Dale.
Yeah, I am. But do you remember washing the dining hall with a fire truck every Wednesday?
Every Wednesday.
And it would turn into a camp-wide water fight.
Yes. We had a very old surplus fire truck, I guess you'd call it, and we had to fill it up at the water tower, and exactly like, we spent a lot of fun times in that dining hall, Dale.
Yeah, you did.
Yeah, it was, Fern Stange was the cook.
Yeah.
And she had some rules, the scouts were expected to eat what they were served, and the first time I wrote the menu on the blackboard, okay, it's a wilderness stew. And they didn't eat enough of that. She said, okay, they're getting it again today, find a new name for it. Okay, beef a la vegetable. And eventually it all disappeared.
Yeah. And remember, it was a lot of, seemed like surplus food. Talk about some of the menu items.
Well, that was the thing. There was a lot of it was a program called Section 32 Commodities. It said for distribution to schools and other eligible outlets not to be sold or exchanged.
Yeah.
And it was canned vegetables.
Yeah.
It was canned beef. It was good stuff, and it helped the good ag department program buy the surplus from the producers and distribute it as they did. And one great thing about it was every year through that program, we got fresh peaches from Georgia. And they were in perfect condition when they arrived here. It would last for a week or so, but that was really something else.
Let's hear it for Georgia, huh?
I
Let's hear it for Georgia.
I always thought the food was fine. And of course, I have never had a bad meal in my life, so I'm probably not the one to judge, but
You want to talk about Bed Spring chicken?
Oh, yeah, yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Saturday.
Saturdays, well, this is the regular staff, the cooking staff was not involved with this, but as the scouts were leaving and their families were coming in to pick them up, there was chicken, which was barbecued chicken, which was cooked over Bed Springs. Yeah, it was a challenge. So many people were being served that sometimes a lot of the chicken got overdone, some of it not quite done enough, but it was legendary. Bed Spring chicken.
Yeah.
Then the executives and some of the senior people were out there flipping the chicken, and they did it in the rain, they did it in the heat, they did it in the wind. One way or another, they cooked the chicken on Saturday morning for a Saturday noon meal.
Yep. When I started out in 1960, we were doing it. And in 73, when I was the camp director here, we rebuilt that thing and put bricks up there. So it had to have been gone. I don't know how long it lasted after that. But it went on for a long, long time.
And he's famous.
No one died.
No.
Do you guys remember sometime in the 60s when they would get free milk because the cows had eaten in onion patches?
No.
And the milk tasted like onions.
Really? I don't remember that.
The milk, we had the milk in the big coolers.
Yeah.
In what, they were like 5-gallon containers in the coolers. I can remember sticking those milk containers in the coolers.
I can't remember who was before. I was on staff in 64 and 5, so it might have been earlier than that.
Who are you?
Steve Poole.
Oh,
Steve.
there's Steve.
Sure.
Okay. I'm
Yes.
glad you're here.
Yes.
Somebody was asking about the nature hut.
Yes.
About the what?
Nature hut.
Oh, the nature hut.
You were in charge of the nature hut.
I was in 65.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why don't you
And,
talk about that?
Yes, and then Isle of Dreams. I remember
Oh, yes.
Yes, canoeing to Isle of Dreams because they had good-looking daughters.
Really?
All the time. Well, you were a legend.
Steve was in charge of the nature hut in 65, and that was just a little bit north of where the tower is now.
Yeah.
That's my recollection.
Yes, I was a scout craft aide in 64.
Okay.
And I
You took my place, 'cause
took your place, you were 63?
no, if I wouldn't have gone to the jamboree, I would have been a scout craft aide.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so I was in the unit just right by the mess hall.
Yeah, that's
They
where.
had that little commissioner's
Yep.
area there, yeah.
Wow.
Cool. I'm glad you're here.
Yes.
You could have gotten up and talked about this all this stuff.
Yeah. What
Well,
about?
Now, I'm gonna ask you, do you remember, since you camped up here, in the early 60s, do you remember the, bed springs and mattresses all out for the camp?
God, that's awful.
U.S. military surplus bed springs and
Terrible.
mattresses that probably were given to us in 1950, and they were being used every weekend, every week. And we would haul them all to campsites. Kids would use them all week. And we'd go out there and we'd pick up the springs and mattresses, and the ones that were wet, we'd kind of peel off to the side and let them dry for a week, and then hand them out the next week after that.
They dried in the sun to disinfect though, so. Good to see you, Steve. What there is of you to see.
Right.
Well,
Camp Wilderness was 62 and a half years ago, January of 1959. It was an 11-year-old. We'd come up for winter camp and staying in the Apache cabin. And I was here for, off and on for the next 3 or 4 years. And then in 1972, January of 72, I was halfway through my first year of teaching. I was industrial arts teacher at Central Junior High. And on a Monday in January, two of the kids in my class, 8th graders, said, "You mentioned you were a scout in Breckenridge, Mr. Hall." And I said, "Yeah." They said, "Have you ever thought of working with the scout troop as an adult?" I said, "No, I'm busy
Kids
graduating."
recruited you?
They tricked me into it.
Wow.
And one of the kids was Ron Schneider.
Understood.
So they said, "Why don't you come over to the church basement tomorrow night for a meeting?" So Tuesday, 7 o'clock, I walked into the church basement. I got a standing ovation from the boys. They handed me a briefcase and said, "You'll find what you need in here. By the way, we're going to winter camp on Friday." So that was my introduction. I was a scoutmaster at Troop 640 for 30 years, and now work as a properties chairman. But just some random thoughts from a random brain, and Mark will elaborate on this.
On the random brain?
No, one of the things that surprised me, because it had been like 1963, that was the last time I was up here as a kid, and I come back in 72, winter, and then in the summer, and nothing had changed here. I didn't realize it, but they were in some financial hard times, and things were pretty tough. You talked about the government surplus commodities in the dining hall, breakfast, bulgur oats.
Oh, yeah.
John Lean, Cookie, and his name was mentioned. John I remember him getting chewed out by a scout professional because Saturday for breakfast he made these big caramel rolls, the most expensive meal of the whole week per serving. And they said, "You got to cut down on cost." John says their parents are going to be here in 2 hours and pick them up. And the first thing one of the parents always says, "How was the food?" He says, "A kid can only remember their last meal." I remember as a kid and as an adult in the 70s, the destroylets in the bathroom, the scary legends that go with that. The outdoor showers, okay, remember that? Cabins, when you stayed in the winter and built the fire and warmed them up, you could hear the bats in the wall. They got woken up. And the little caboose stoves in the cabins.
And then, Tom, but the other thing is, you could always tell when you went to winter camp who the more experienced campers were, because the older scouts would always tell the new ones, you'd walk into these cold camps, you can have the top bunk. And then you get the fire going, and right away they lay in that top bunk, go, "Darn, this is great." And about 2 in the morning, they're dying of heat. The older guys are on the bottom, tier 3, they're on the bottom, sleeping soundly.
Norm Georgino was a ranger here during most of the 70s. He raised 4 kids in a 2-bedroom house that wasn't very well insulated and basically didn't have anything to work with as far as tools or supplies or anything like that. His youngest son, David, ended up being an Eagle Scout from Troop 640, my troop. So there were 3 summer camp plans here during the 70s. Most of the troops were on the regular plan where they ate all their meals in the dining hall. Coonskin Camp, where my troop always stayed, was the plan where you provide your own food service for a much less cost, and you got to take part in all the camp program. And then there was Boardman, the outpost camp, where they got the only camp program they got. They could come to chapel and they could come to the OA tap out. Otherwise, they did their own thing out there. So, and those of you who remember Rich Jacobson, who had a special needs troop, he was always at Boardman. George Burke from Hillsborough and myself always took the 2 sites at Coonskin. And we did our own food service down there, but kids took part in all the merit badges and stuff. I remember one summer, scout professional, I think it was Raleigh Reynolds, ended up buying, must have been an entire semi of Seidel trail food. That's not known for its good taste for fine food, but they served a lot of that this summer. Seidel must have had one heck of a salesman. I mentioned about no tools or equipment. Poor Norm, well, one summer or winter when the loggers were here and did some logging, instead of paying the council in cash, they went over to Loft Lumber in Nevis and set up an account where Norm could go over there and buy some stuff, just subtract it from the account, which I'm sure was illegal, but that was the only way anything to do. I was up here when they built during a work weekend, when they built the addition on cabin 13. We had 2 guys that found a pail of used nails that had been pulled up. They spent the morning straightening out bent nails. And a lot of scouters ended up buying stuff. Remember, there was not a ladder, even a step ladder in the entire camp. And he came up here, he was going to, electrician, he was going to hang some lights. And he went into town and bought a step ladder, wrote his name and his company name on it, and says, Norm, can I store it in your shop?
So I was up here in '73, and that was another one of those financially lean years. And the first 6 weeks, or first 5 weeks, they had professional scouters running as camp director, and I was program director. Well, then the last 3 weeks, I was camp director. And as soon as the professional scouter left, Norm came up to me and said, there's this bench grinder that I really, really need. Can I buy it? I said, sure. He ran into the town, bought the thing, came back. I heard about it.
In 1975, we had a work crew up here, and they built new seats in the outhouses. Each campsite had a wooden pit outhouse. And somebody, a volunteer, sadistic volunteer, took a skill saw and just cut a square hole. Well, at camp that summer, that was the complaints of all the kids. It hurt to use the outhouse. And Dennis Trezani, a professor from Moorhead, was camp director. And Dennis and I went in and we bought L&M out of cheap toilet seats and put them on. And he heard about that too. So,
yeah, I ended up getting to be scoutmaster a little classier than Tom. I was recruited to be an assistant scoutmaster. The scoutmaster at Trinity, his wife got real sick, and so I was acting scoutmaster for 13 years. His wife died after 3 weeks, so I really got taken on that one too. But I was here as a scout. In fact, I loved driving in and looking at the one big tree planting down at the bottom, because that was part of one of the first things I did. And I couldn't imagine back then what it might be like someday to have a big trees there. So imagine my shock maybe 15 years ago when I heard they were logging out a part of it. It's just like, not fair. And Gene, it's finally good to meet you. I've seen your name forever in our scout logs. One of the first Eagle Scouts from Trinity. So, you and Mr. LeVolt.
Yes, I talked to Jack, and he just is in the final processes of moving into a senior thing, or else he would have been here.
Oh, that would have been fun. Anyway, our troop, I was a scoutmaster in the 70s. I was with all these characters in the 60s, although I didn't know them because they got lucky. But in the 70s, our troop varied in size like every other troop does when you go to camp. Sometimes you're going to camp and you have like 8, 9, 10 guys. Sometimes you have 20 guys. So you kind of figure this out, which camp you're going to go to. And we found that we used 3 campsites within Wilderness. The big one that the first one we started with was Hickory. But back in the 70s, they were still calling it Jackarilla. And we happened to have a kid that spoke Spanish, so he was trying to correct staff. And it got to the point where when we would go to things as a camp gathering and they'd call out Jackarilla, my kids wouldn't move. And then finally, the staff would try to pronounce Hickory and failed, and so that was one of my memories of Hickory. One of the other things was Hickory back then, and I haven't been there lately, it was a very tight campsite. So it was really good because one tent would go back in the woods here, and one back in the woods here, one back here, but there really wasn't a good central area. So myself and usually another adult, we'd spend a lot of our week at camp digging out stumps because that was one of the headaches with Hickory, was it was full of stumps in your clear spot. It didn't have a latrine, it didn't have a shelter, which made, when we had the bigger campsite, we'd go to Klamath. Huge campsite, lots of room, all sorts of places off on the perimeter, so you could go on little hikes, disappear, and it was wonderful. The kids loved it. And of course, it's kind of a nice location. But the big thing, two big things, was the latrine, but the water was between there and Iowa. So it was easy to get water, rather than Hickory where you had to go across the road to this water area. And it had a spigot where you could fill your bucket full of water. That was a big deal. And of course, the really great thing about Klamath was it actually had a shelter. And so when it rained, which seemed like it did in the 70s a lot, you could be under the shelter and cook and eat and not be soaked. So that was great for us. And one of the last campsites we started to use, we used it all the way through the 90s, was Gilmore. Nobody liked Gilmore for some reason. And it was always seemed to be an open campsite, but it's wonderful because it's right by the hub of all the activities. So we would stay up there, and I can still remember talking to the camp staff when we pulled into Gilmore, I think it was late 70s, and went back and we said, well, we have a problem with the campsite. There's a bear cub standing on a branch right over where my assistant scoutmaster set his tent. And camp staff, being the wonderful, helpful people they always have, said, well, just wait, it'll go away. So that was kind of some of the thoughts that I had, but we haven't really talked a lot about winter camp. And our winter camp experience, when we're in the slot here, was like everybody else's. But our troop started using Blackfoot for our winter camp experience, and that was really kind of interesting. And I can remember in the early and mid 70s, they never plowed past here. So we had two options. The first option, we learned the first year, was a poor one, and that was you drive in because you really got stuck. And it was just miserable on Sunday trying to get back out of there because you couldn't even turn around. Then the second problem, of course, is all your gear had to go down the hill. And going down the hill isn't a big deal, but Sunday going up the hill after your path got icy was really kind of a treat. The Blackfoot then had two stoves. They had a cooking stove, beautiful cooking stove on one end, and then they had a potbelly on the other end. We would make some pretty phenomenal things. We would make bread, because the cook stove was just like my Aunt Millie's. So we'd make bread. We'd always make really kind of fun meals. One of the great stories that came out of our troop from that was, one year I went moose hunting, and we got a moose. And so Saturday night we had this fabulous stew, and the kids made it, and I had brought the meat and cooked it all up, and the kids are eating it, and this is great. And afterwards I said, and then we had a feast. It went everything from salad to pudding for dessert. Anyway, the kids were done and starting to clean up. I said, I just want you guys to know that we had moose for dinner. And this one scout turned to the other and said, I told you that wasn't regular pudding. It was So, anyway, our troop did a lot of walking here. I can remember talking with the different staff here, and if we were going to go on a longer walk, and we did the red trail and the green trail, those were just kind of highways for us. But we'd go up on the brown and the black trail, and I know that staff would, if we told them that, especially the ranger, they'd spray paint up markers because the markings up on those trails were horrible. I don't know if they're any better now. But it was really kind of fun. But one winter camp, we had just gone to Ootpick up at Somers Canoe Base for winter camping techniques. And I had 4 kids that wanted to camp away from Wilderness Central, as they called it. So we, 5 of us, skied up to Lily Lake. And out on the far end of Lily Lake, they built a Quincy, and I left them Saturday at dark, which would be about 5 o'clock in January. Skied back, we had dinner I had dinner with the troop. We had brought food up for them, so they spent the night in the Quincy, had made their own dinner, made their own breakfast. I skied out after breakfast at Ordnance, or at Blackfoot, to pick them up. Now think about that in 2021. It was, they had a great time, and they all survived it. 2 of them are MDs actually. But those were the kinds of things that I can remember from the 70s with my scouts.
Mark hinted at the trails. Bill Nelson from Fargo and I were OA advisors in the 70s, but for Minnedoodle Lodge, and then shortly after the merger. But one of the things the OA did was develop the color coding for the trails. And Bill Nelson and I walked every one of those trails. Now, Bill was an art teacher in Fargo, and using that, we verified all these and put the colors in, and Bill did the artwork, and we got this map made, and this is the first good map of Camp Wilderness for scouts. And we had several thousand of these printed, and they were sold in the trading post for $1 a piece. And that map was used, well, basically until John Wanzig hired that cartographer and got that beautiful map that we have now, including the miniature versions. But that was one of the things that got developed in the 70s. And then being a shop teacher and a scout leader, my scouts were in my metal shop at Central Junior High for a number of Saturdays, making these rectangular, well, actually diamond-shaped markers and painting them with the different colors. And during a couple of OA conclaves and a work weekend, our troop walked, and some other troops walked the trails and nailed these things up on trees. And there's still a few of them out there today. And that was from the mid-70s.
There's one marker that our troop found up somewhere, it might be close to the intersection of the brown and the black trail way up. But the diamond marker started very early, but that one actually has a name on it, and it's Andrew Munn. Anybody knows Andrew? You know,
Another shop teaching.
yeah, another shop teaching. And I was really baited. We should really take it down because I thought it would be great history, but then I thought, you know, in the 70s, where are you going to put it? So leaving it on that tree, I figured was the best place for it, so it's probably still out there. And now that you have a history center, make it a good place to be. But that was really kind of a fun surprise thing that we found way up north. Tom's getting tired, and so am I, and everything that I've got left is really boring.
The 70s were really tight money-wise here. In the late 80s, things started to pick up, and you can see all of the development that got going here. Some good fundraising and some wonderful donors and things like that. But we were struggling in the 70s.
Could use a little more donation, get a little nicer wood cabins for wood camp, but that's in the future.
Well, they all got electric heat now.
I know.
And they're insulated.
And they're insulated. And not bad insulation.
No.
B18.
Any questions for us? Yes.
Yeah, was there a reason for the money woes? Was it like there weren't enough scouters, or there weren't enough donors, or?
In the early 80s, it was due to some mismanagement at the top level. In the 70s, to be honest, I don't know.
Was there another period in the 60s that was mentioned that had tough times like that?
Well, like I said, I was here in the early 60s as a youth, and I come back in the early 70s, and there had been nothing done at camp. I mean, everything was the same. And it's the only thing different in the early 70s, Earl Swanson, who was very active scouting, Uncle Earl, he was big in the union, and he was a bricklayer, and he got the shop. That was the only addition, and it was a big empty garage because there was nothing to put in it. I come up here, I donated a skill saw. Norm was supposed to be the ranger here, and he didn't even have a skill saw to work with.
And actually, thinking about Uncle Earl, one of the things I was thinking about just the other day was work camps up here in the fall weren't for kids and for camp staff. They were Uncle Earl and the people that he found, not only Union people, but a lot of others. And it took me a few years to really figure it out. It was basically all World War II vets. There was out of the Legion, the VFW. My dad was involved with both of them, and Earl was involved, and the other Earl Keelan, was involved. And that was just kind of their way to get up here in the fall. And they'd get up here in the fall, they'd do a great weekend of work. And then the bonus, their payment, I guess is what you'd call it, was they could come up here during deer season. And I can remember two things. One was when we wired this block building, my dad was an electrician, so he and our crew came up. And we wired during the day, but right away in the morning, and after 3 in the afternoon, we all went our separate ways and we all went grouse hunting. And we had great grouse dinners that Friday and Saturday. But that was kind of how it operated back then, because they had no money, and this was, you know, let people hunt for the ability to get some stuff done. It's a good thing.
Another thing that happened during the 70s, you remember the family cabins used to be right behind cabin 14, which was the health lodge. Well, in the 70s, the family cabins got moved down to their present location. It was done by volunteer work. And I remember I worked with Mark and for his dad, and his dad sent me up here for a week to wire the family cabins at no cost to the scouts. And then Mark and his dad joined me at the end of the week. We rewired the dining hall to bring it up to code. That was all donations. So there was things happening, but not fast and not big like happened in the 90s and the 2000s. So.
And part of it is, I'm thinking about your question. I think part of the problem with the 60s and maybe even into the 70s was so fast. Right? By 60, when we are all getting into scouting, that whole wave of kids hit. And I think they were just having a hard time keeping things going as they were, much less trying to figure out how do we get something better done. And I don't think that they were going out and getting donations and whatever. They were just kind of expecting money to flow in. I think might have been the problem. And then all the things that got built in the 50s needed a lot of repair, and all of a sudden there was no money. I'm just speculating, but that in my mind would seem to work.
So it didn't seem to come with depressed times in the nation.
No.
It was really
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what a coincidence, our next speaker just showed up.
Hey, Tom, I want to say one thing though. This isn't a 70 deal, it's an 80 deal. I can remember working out here and having these big spools of keys. Remember this, Tom?
Oh, yeah.
So you would go through every one and you'd be trying, and if you didn't memorize this at 859, and that was one of them from 30 years ago, if you couldn't remember you go through about 25 keys. Today, when I left, I had one key for everything, and that was Dave to Tom.
Yes.
So.
Andy gets a lot of envy when he goes to these ranger schools,
Yes,
because most camps, you know, it's a separate padlock for every building because that's what they can afford. And this has an extensive master key system. I set it up so that I do institutional locksmithing work part-time, but I set it up so that most staff members only carry 2 keys, one for their cabin and one for their program or work area. And the administration carries 1 key. And makes life a lot simpler. But Camp Wilderness do a lot of donations. I got that done. So okay, thank you.
All right. Well, I'm Joel Heckner, and the 80s decade really fits for me because my first night in Camp Wilderness was in May of 1979, and it was an Arrow Light weekend. So I was getting my Arrow Light, and at that time, they did it up here at camp in a weekend event. So we camped up on the old archery range, and it was a miserable weekend, just cold and rainy. But you know, it wasn't miserable enough to keep me from coming back. So my first summer as a camper was in 1980. I was from Wahpeton, so I came with my troop with Myron Kopang as a scoutmaster, and he had been bringing troops here for years and kept coming for years after that as well. We stayed in Klamath, which is now called Maynard Whedon, and you know, in those early 80s, I was a camper for those first 4 years, 80 through 83. It was, just like they were talking about in the 70s, it was a pretty tight time financially. The staff was spread pretty thin, so that we've got commissioners teaching some of the nature badges, and the program director was teaching some badges, and just some of the names, you know, from those years. I remember Bill Molaski, and I don't know if he's a program director or camp director. Whenever his name was said, the staff broke into song. Bill Molaski, you know, the Oh My Darling Clementine melody. So he was famous because he had the song, you know, about it. But then, so the big new thing that came along in the 1980s was the Cope course. 83 was the first summer of Cope. That was my last summer as a camper here, and I didn't do it that summer, but I was able to do it the next year when I was on staff. I never was a CIT, but I just applied to be on staff when I turned 16, and they hired me, and I was really excited because I was going to be earning $50 a week. And I was a commissioner aide at what's now Mataga, and at that time it was called Windigo. The commissioners and commissioner aides taught badges like camping and cooking and pioneering. We also did totem chips, and we did fire demonstrations. And then one of the cool things I thought about commissioners when I was first a camper here was that here they were out in a campsite in the wilderness, but they had their own telephone. And so, you know, if your troop wanted to schedule a troop shoot at the archery range or the rifle range, you go to your commissioner site, they pick up the phone and call up the range and say, you know, can we schedule this troop at this time? And you can get that done. Or if a scout happened to leave their buddy tag on the waterfront board, the waterfront might call you up and say, hey, we're missing this scout, can you go check if they're in their campsite? You know, every time we go, of course, they're there in the campsite. The other thing the commissioners did was that we got to walk around to all the troop campsites and do our, you know, we kind of call them different things over the years. Sometimes we call them inspections, and then in other years we wanted to kind of get away from that idea of being an inspector, and we called them like checklists. We're going to do the troop checklist. But the idea was always to get into the troop sites, you know, get to talking to the patrol leader, the senior patrol leader, the scoutmaster, see how their week was going, see if they needed anything, what can we do to make their week better, and then also to make sure they were following the health and safety guidelines, like having the sand and water by their tents and by the fire and things like that, having the duty roster posted. So we fill out the checklist or the inspection score sheet on the bulletin board every day. And then, you know, in some years, a troop from the south side would get picked as the troop of the day, and the troop from the north side would also get picked, and those troops would have their troop flags flown on the two wooden poles in the main area here next to the center pole. So that was always a big honor and exciting for the troop. I know my troop, when I was a camper, was picked, you know, at least a couple times as troop of the day. Some other staff people that are pretty prominent to come from the 80s. Actually, the first one, Steve Werpy, started in the 70s, and he was on staff throughout the early 70s, and then from 77 to 84, he took a break. And then I met him in '84 because that was my first year on staff. And then that was his first year coming back after taking a 7-year break. And so at that time, in '84, Steve was a commissioner. And one of the things we started as commissioners then was like doing the Scoutmaster breakfast. And that had been done for many years, but we would always make the egg in the hole. So toast on the grill with a hole in it, and crack the egg in it. And then the other big theatrical flourish that Steve often liked to do, and I continued it when I was a commissioner, is just to make the coffee, just dumping the grounds in the water and boiling it on the fire, but then you had to settle the grounds because they're all over in the water. So you take a flaming stick out of the fire and just plunge it into the coffee. I'm not a coffee maker, so I never knew how that turned out, but apparently it worked to settle the grounds. And then Steve, later in '86, became the program director. I skipped '85, and from what I hear, that was a good year to skip. Because just this morning, staff who were there in '85 were telling me how they often went in to eat like almost every day because the food at the dining hall was so bad. But actually, I skipped '85 because I went to the National Jamboree. I was on staff at the National Jamboree, but I applied for wilderness staff, and I just put in my application, I'm going to be gone for this week, this 10 days for the National Jamboree. And in many years, staff members are still hired, and they just work out somehow to cover that time when you're gone. But I never heard back a word, so I assumed they just didn't want me. So that's why I was skipped '85. But I came back in '86 as a commissioner, and Steve was the program director. And that was the year Tom Mulhern was the camp director, and we had a larger staff than ever before that year in '86. And the other unique thing about '86 was that was the year that the same staff covered all 3 camps. We started in Camp Wilderness, did a staff week and 4 weeks of camping. Then we had a week of staff week at Metagoshi. We had about 2 days off in between before we needed to be at Metagoshi. And then we did like 3 weeks of camping at Metagoshi. And then without any days off, we went directly from Metagoshi and we caravanned all the way to Heart Butte. And had a staff week at Heart Butte for just 1 week of camping at Heart Butte. So we had a whole staff week set up just for 1 week of campers. And then because the camps were smaller at each move, we also kind of dwindled a little bit. We lost a few staff members by design because that was part of the plan. So it was a long summer, but Tom Mulhern was a strong camp director, and '86 for a lot of us, '86 seems to be like a year that was really a turning point for staff, because especially after the low point of '85, that in '86 staff really did a good job, and a lot of them returned for the next several years. And we had a lot of good retention and veteran staff members coming back in '87, '88, '89. One of the things that was a little different then than there is now is like how staff awards were done. So Steve Werpy and Jeff Pastor, and then whoever else that they wanted to gather or whoever else volunteered kind of called themselves the committee. But the way they operated was kind of secret, and it was always like kind of surreptitious. People would whisper about the committee, and as a new staff member, you never really quite knew like, what is this secret committee? What are they doing? And of course, it turns out you didn't find out till the end of the season that what they're doing is they're working on awards, and every staff member got an award at the end of the camp season. That was on a painted split piece of wood, and it had a name of the award on it, and a lot of them were kind of funny, just poking fun at some characteristic of that staff member, the other thing that was kind of a secret thing was how we handled birthday parties or birthdays of staff members during the birthdays that happened to come up during the summer season. So it was pretty much the same people, the committee, who instigated these surprise birthday parties. So if your birthday happened to be in the summer, you might be like after campfire when it's dark out, you might suddenly be like jumped on the path and escorted to the dining hall for a secret midnight Cracker Barrel with birthday cake or something that the cook had made earlier that night. And sometimes they would also mock the Ku Klux Klan, which of course today you'd be like unthinkable. How could, but at the time, it was just like seemed like really funny to make fun of, and to have sheets and pretend like you're grabbing this person off the trail, bring him to the birthday party. So somebody mentioned earlier this morning about grilling chicken, and that was something that must have gone on for decades because they talked about it on Saturday, but for us it was Friday nights. So Friday nights was always grilled chicken on the barbecue pit, the waterfront staff was usually the people who were in charge of grilling chicken. I don't know how that happened, that the waterfront staff would be the ones grilling the chicken, but they were. And then they would all wear Hawaiian shirts. So that it got to the point where just about all of the staff would wear Hawaiian shirts on Friday afternoons. And they'd turn on the Harry Belafonte music, like Day-O, and everybody would be singing along to the Harry Belafonte and grilling chicken. So it was really like a party atmosphere Friday night. The chicken would all be boiled first, so to make sure it was done. So really, it only needed to be warmed up.
Not every year.
Well,
A year where we didn't think of it, and that was a mess.
Yeah. Well, it was kind of a mess even when it was boiled because it was so done that you'd try to pick it up and flip it and it would kind of fall apart in your tongs, But that was your bookends. Chicken was Friday night and then barbecues was Sunday night. Every Sunday night was barbecues because it was served outside, in the Pines instead of in the dining hall. One of the best skits that I remember, Wilderness Olympics, where Jeff Pastor would be the head and the arms, the feet, but his feet would really be his arms. It was through a blanket. And then somebody else would be his arms. And so then you'd have a narrator off to the side saying, and the Olympians start their day and they wake up and the arms would go like this to stretch. And then they'd shave and they'd have a bowl of water so they'd splash them in the face and put shaving cream all over it. If you think about Jeff Pastor being the face in that blanket, it was pretty funny. Some of you, probably not very many of you, have probably heard the story about when I was a first year staff member. I was a pretty quiet guy, I still am, but Friday the 13th, so it was Friday, July 13th, I still remember exactly the date because it was Friday the 13th. There's a full moon. And every Friday that summer, Steve Werpy, Jeff Pastor, and two other junior staffers had a kind of a standing tradition that every Friday they would drive to Bemidji after the campfire to Perkins, have a cinnamon roll there, and drive all the way back. And this Friday, the 13th, they happened to invite me. I don't know why they thought I needed to go along, but they invited me. Maybe one of them couldn't go or something. So I go along to Perkins. It's after campfire, so we get, it's like an hour drive to Bemidji. You're sitting at Perkins, and they're the slowest restaurant in the world in the first place. And so it's late when we're driving back. And in order for Steve to keep from falling asleep at the wheel, he stops on the road like 2 or 3 times. And each time he stops, like one time we had to do a Chinese fighter drill and run around the car, and I'll get back in. Another time we had to get out and howl at the moon because it was a full moon. Another time we had to go out and ride on the road because someone had to pee. So we get back to camp and it's way late, like midnight at least, probably after midnight. And we park in the parking lot over here, and as we park, the headlights shine like right over where cabin 10 is, which is where Pastor's cabin was, Jeff Pastor. And actually at the same time we're pulling out, then John Wright, who was the Cope director, is also pulling out from the Chateau Paulette, which is where Zarba's used to be, or which was used to be where Zarba's is now. And so they had a lot stronger stuff at the Chateau than we had at Perkins. So we both pull out right about the same time. Our headlights are shining in cabin 10. And what we see is that all the furniture that was in cabin 10, because at that time the bunks were metal bunks that were movable, they weren't built in. All that furniture was outside of the cabin and it was being arranged in exactly the same arrangement that would have been inside the cabin, but outside. So the bunks were coming out and all their stuff was coming out, tables, all coming out. And as the people who are doing this see us pulling in and getting out of our cars, they run. And we track them and we see that they're going down to Gilwell. And we go, who's staying in Gilwell? Neil Litton's troop. So John and Jeff primarily are thinking, okay, well, we can't let this stand. So the first idea, John Wright was also the quartermaster, so he ran the tractor. He's like, we can hide their trailer. So he drives the tractor down the Gilwell Road, hooks up the troop trailer for Neil's troop, drives it up to the quartermaster's shop, which is where the trading post is now, at the back end of that trading post building. And there's a sliding door at the back, so we slid the door, the big barn door open to back the trailer in, and we get almost into the quartermaster shop, and he stops, and we look, and we see that the trailer is just like an inch wider than the doorway. So that it's not going in the trading post, because we were going to just hide it, it's not going in the QM shop. So we need a plan B. So John's at Cope, and he says, I know. We've got this huge pile of sawdust at the Cope site because we have that, for the zip line to land into the sawdust. Let's take the trailer out there and we'll fill it up with sawdust. So we're in the QM shop, so we fill up the trailer with all these shovels, and he's still already got on the tractor, and we all drive out to the Cope site. And this huge pile of sawdust, we just keep shoveling it into Neil's trailer. Close it up. John brings the trailer back, parks it at Gilwell, exactly the same spot it was before. We all go to bed. By this time, it's like the wee hours of the morning, so we get maybe like an hour or two of sleep. So the next morning, we all got these silly grins on our faces for Saturday morning breakfast. And we're all like, oh, good morning, Neil, And he tells us that he sent a scout to go get something out of the trailer, and the scout came back and said, Mr. Litton, there's wood chips in our trailer. And Neil said, well, just sweep them out. And the scout says, oh no, Mr. Litton. So that's how this song, this One Bottle Pop song that has this verse in it that says, don't put your dust in my dustpan. From that day forward, that verse got changed to don't put your dust in my trailer, right? Because that's the reason. So I just heard this morning that Neil actually got back for that prank by putting all of the road construction signs he could find in the whole area into the Fox building, where Jeff Pastor was staying. It was later on that season, that fall. I don't know. Let's see. Anything else about the 80s?
In 85, we didn't have enough money for buddy pay, so I'm assuming they're like, the scout executive was, I don't know if Terry Funder was arrested or we finally, it was caught.
He was caught.
From the council. Things, they're a little better, like in 86, it seems like they can't turn around. It's been on an upward trajectory ever since.
Yeah. Well, and Don Pike and I were just talking about when I was program director, we still had the old machines that we called Kachunka machines because they had this drum, and when they went around, it went Kachunk, 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 and it made the copies with the purple ink on them. So you'd have to handwrite something on this carbon paper and master, and put the master on the machine, and then have the machine turn. But then when we put these sheets with our purple ink on the troop bulletin boards, the sun would fade the ink in just a day or two. Or if it rained, the ink would just all stream down. So, I mean, it was pretty bad. So finally I convinced John to get a copy machine. And we were able to actually make copies with black ink. And the other thing that was different then is how, and this is the carryover from decades past, also how we had what we called a Scoutmaster tent in every campsite, where it was a wooden platform. So during staff week, the commissioner staff spent 2 whole days just setting up campsites, where we had to take the platform down from being propped up in the trees and put it back down on the ground. We had to set up this wall canvas tent, like the CIT tents we have now. And then we had to haul out these metal beds, metal from the QM, and put a mattress on it, and get all this set up, and then make sure the campsite had a flagpole in it, make sure it had a bulletin board on it. And all of this is now just kind of permanent now. It's kind of in place in the campsite. So you've saved all that time of not needing to set all that stuff up that we used to have to do. And then another big change for me is the meals. How the meals were always family style, where the troops sent a table waiter ahead of time before the meal to get all the tables set up, to set your table. And then during the meal, the dining hall steward would say, "Table waiters, come up and get your eggs." And the eggs would be on platters or in bowls. "Table waiters, come up and get your French toast." And they come with a platter. And then it would be passed around the table, family style. And then as troops, as a way to invite a staff member to come to your table, the troops would pick, or the table waiters would pick a totem, because each staff member would have to make a little totem, which is usually like a little wooden block that you might have painted or put your name on, or some symbol of what you did, like maybe a paddle from the waterfront or something. And so if you, as a staff member, when you walked in, you would have to walk around and look on all the tables to see where your totem was, and wherever your totem was, you sat there, because that meant the troop was inviting you to sit with it, to have a meal with it. At the end of the meal, everyone was dismissed. Like, the table waiters stayed, and they had to wipe down all the tables and everything like that. So that was a big change when we moved from that whole family-style dining to the buffet dining that we've done ever since. Any other questions? All right.
I'm John Fike, and I was the council program director for the council from 1989 until, I guess, when I left in 2006, 15 years ago. And I had one question when they approached me. I've been a district executive for about 5 years. And when I was asked if I wanted the job of program director, I was interested in it, but I had one question. It was a deal breaker. It was April 15th when I started becoming the program director that year. And I said, "Is the camp director and the program director hired yet for the summer camp?" And they said, "Yes, it is." "Yes, they are." It's Joel Heckner, which is Joel, and Steve Workley. I said, "Okay, I'll accept the job." But I was telling Joel earlier, had the answer been no, we don't have the camp director and the program director hired on April 15th or April 1st, whatever it was, I wouldn't have taken the job. And so that would have really changed my career a great deal, because I would have never been a part of Camp Wilderness. But so in 1989, I became the program director for the council. And to say that we had kind of a tough, put it this way, every septic system, every power line needed to be replaced or fixed. The water tower leak, remember that? You have to turn the water off. You ran until it's full and you turned it off, and then it leaked. The council didn't have a camp ranger. We had a caretaker at the time, and it was really kind of a bad situation for her because, as some of the guys heard earlier in the morning, the council didn't have any money, wasn't spending any money on the camp, and the council was, quite frankly, going bankrupt at the time. And so tools and of any nature or improvements hadn't been happening for at least 10 years. So every roof needed to be replaced, and you've heard about the bats and the mice and whatever else. That was pretty much throughout the whole property. What we gave our camp staff, whatever was broken last year, we would put away at the end of the camp season, and then it wouldn't get looked at until staff week the next year when it was too late to buy anything. So it was kind of like, well, just make do. And that was a real problem for me. I grew up in business. I grew up working construction. I grew up in retail business, and it was so the message it sent, in my view, was that it didn't matter what kind of program you provided. If you didn't provide the right equipment, you didn't provide training, all those things. If you didn't provide twine, or if you didn't provide a copy machine so you could have copies that could hang that would actually be able to be read. There was just a whole host of it was like it didn't matter, and for me it did matter, and we kind of struggled for a year or two just to kind of get everything kind of like whack-a-mole. When one thing would go wrong, you fix the next thing. But in 1990, between Christmas and New Year's, we had a kind of a visioning meeting or a strategic planning meeting. We met in the Fox building for a couple days, and I think Brad, you were probably, I don't know, Joe, I know Brad was there, but we had talked about what we wanted Camp Wilderness to be, and at the very beginning, we went around the room, what do you want to see happen at Camp Wilderness? And one of the guys said, well, I'd like to see all the septic systems pumped or fixed or whatever, and somebody else talked about roofs, and somebody else talked about something else, and there were probably about 10 of us in the room there. And I can remember what my comment was. I said, well, the first thing I want is for the camp to be here forever. And that meant money. And that wasn't about program, it was about money. Because if I can't provide you with twine, or if I can't provide you with a copy machine to make copies, even the basics we weren't doing very well. So we needed to figure out how to make the camp self-sufficient in a way that the council didn't have to throw it a bowl or subsidize it. And the second thing I said was, we're going to be in Voice Life magazine. And everybody laughed at me. And when I said, no, I'm serious. We're going to be in Voice Life magazine. And then kind of like changed the thought, well, what would it take to be in Voice Life magazine? And I don't know, Brad, you probably know how many times you've been in Voice Life and Scouting magazine. Several times we had the cover of Scouting magazine one year. So from that standpoint, we started changing up kind of the view of how things were going to be. I will tell you that the camp staff and the volunteers, this camp stayed alive not because of any council or because of any council professional. It's because of the volunteers and the camp staff who were around in the late 80s, early 90s. Because without all the help we had, we barely opened up in 1990. And some of you guys were on staff in 90, about all the broken water lines and everything else, and the repairs we had to make it with the kitchen. I remember bringing in about the 1st of April after the scout executive had been let go. I brought the health inspector into the kitchen, and I said, what do I need to fix? And in 1990, he gave me a bill for $35,000, what it ended up being. And $35,000 in 1990 is a lot of money, a lot more than it is today. And so we got the kitchen taken care of, and that was kind of one of the big problems that we had. It was so close that the plumbing company had brought all their crews in off of other jobs to finish us so we could open up camp. And when the kids came in on Sunday, we were still filling the pot on the stove with the hose. And the next day it was taken care of, but it was very close to us not being open in 1990. So we got it open, and I got to thank a few people, and I don't hardly anybody in here is going to know them, but Audrey Sherwood, you guys recognize that name? Well, Audrey was kind of cantankerous, is the word I would use, probably a long time scout volunteer, and she loved you and she blessed you. And man, I tell you what, if she wasn't happy with you, she'd rip you something crazy. Well, I've been in both ends of that, but I will tell you that in 1990 we had all these problems, and And I had a big, long list of problems I knew we needed to fix, but the list kept on getting longer. And you take a whole bunch of stuff off and it kept on getting longer. And in hindsight, if I had known everything that was gonna go wrong, you know, that spring before we got camp open, I don't think that I would have said we could have done it. But Audrey Schur was one of those people that I kept on having every weekend, there'd be a whole bunch of people from the Lakes District, which was Moorhead, Detroit Lakes area. They kept on showing up at camp to work, and I couldn't figure out why is it that area in particular has got all these guys coming every weekend. And it was because Audrey would meet them at their doorstep basically and say, well, you're going to go up to camp next weekend, right? Well, no, I can't. And then she would harangue them until they would come. And literally without her help, I don't think we would have made it. A couple other names, Sam Eli and Dick Witz. Neither one of those guys were big fans of the council, if you want to use the word council, but they helped me a lot in a lot of the remodel we did in the kitchen. We had the work crews from the county. What county is this? It's Hubbard County. The Hubbard County had work crews. We had the work crews out here from the jail, and Sam Eli was the kind of the ramrod. So a lot of volunteers who did a lot of work to make things better. And earlier in the day, you heard about there was no tools or there was no equipment. And I can remember trying to find a tool for some reason, and all I could find in our shop in our QM was one bent pipe wrench. And I had said something about, you know, there's no tools, they're all gone. And Chad Swenson says, well, yeah, there's one little toolbox out there, because Chad had been the QM, the quartermaster. He said, you go over to this end of the shelf, and about 4/10 down, you'll pull it out, it's hidden, because if it wouldn't have been hidden, it would have been gone. But, so having grown up in working construction, you know, the idea of not having tools to fix something that was so basic, or being 20 miles from town and not having a supply of whatever tools or bolts or nuts or whatever that you needed to have on a day-to-day basis was kind of foreign to me. But I also tell you, there was no money. We had a $1.2 million budget, and we owed over $700,000 in payables and short-term note. So you weren't getting paid. If the council spent money with you at that point in time, you weren't getting paid for 6 months. And if you think about that as far as a staff, we probably took the most abuse in that, but if we had been anybody else other than the Boy Scouts, we would have been in bankruptcy. There's no doubt in my mind about that. So I knew that if we were going to make this place successful, that we were not going to be doing it with the help of the, you know, I guess the overall council budget, whatever. So we kind of needed to become self-sufficient, or to where we generated enough money that we could justify putting money back in, and we did that eventually. In fact, it was so bad the first year I was here, when, if you guys remember, there was a grease pit on the north side of the kitchen. I mean, you know, there was a big metal thing, and the water wouldn't drain in the kitchen, so we flipped that big metal thing up, and there was like gunk or gook in this whole thing, and it was just full. And I said, what is that? And it was a grease pit, and it was full. And so when we didn't have any money to pump the septic system, that's how bad it was. So I've been district executive in Fergus Falls and Ozark Trails, or Oxford Trails, and then also at Lakes. And Bob Bailey is a name some of you guys might remember, but he was involved with the DAV, and I had been the district executive, and he raised enough money from the DAV to pump our septic systems that year. That's how poor the council was. We had lots of problems, like I said, you know, all the power lines, it was 3-strand power, and a lot of them were bare, so if you touched them and crossed them, you'd have been zapped. But a lot of the power lines today, I don't think there's hardly any above ground right today. That was intentional, was to get them out of the air. One of the things too, early on, all the aspen and birch trees were nearly 100 years old. They're all the same size, and aspen and birches are like the life of a man. They start dying in their 40s, and by the time they're 100, they're almost all dead. But we were about 85 years old at that point in time, and it was kind of logging or harvesting. Hey Kent, I was trying to remember your name. I saw you earlier. So, but so logging is a dirty word around here, because if you remember, kind of where the Cub Scout camp is now, they had done, in the early 80s, they had done a harvest right down the road. And then it was 11 acres or whatever, but it was right down the road. So they did nothing to kind of hide it or to make it so it was less intrusive. It was like the worst practice you could imagine for logging. And then it's in your front doorstep, as you're driving through, all of a sudden there's this big, harvested area. And aspen and birch, you pretty much have to, but that's all it is, you pretty much you have to clear cut it when you harvest it, because the sun shines on the ground and warms the ground up when it's sunny out. If there's trees up in the air, the ground doesn't get warm enough for an aspen to sprout. So that's why you see when on a harvest, the birches and aspens, they grow up real thick. Well, they could have done that differently, but by the time I got here, we were here, anytime you said harvest or cut a tree down, it was like a dirty word. It's a dirty word for a Boy Scout anyway. We're all taught that don't cut any live trees down, right? So a lot of that, the big old aspens, we had a straight line windstorm, and some of you guys were on camp staff at this time, and there was 120 trees across the road, that 1 mile road into camp, in some way, shape, or form across that road after that storm. We'd also had the power out. That's when we had the North Dakota Guard brought a generator in for us. But if you think about that, you look at the camp today. If you've been in the backwoods, there's ages and stages of trees all throughout the property now, where it used to be pretty much all one age. And there's still some old growth in the property, but from a wildlife and conservation, even fire hazard, it's a much healthier woods now. And you can thank a lot of that to Andy Kitzman, who's by education is a forester by education. And one of the best things we did was hire Andy Kitzman. I think you guys all know Andy. And Andy does a great job. And I can remember the area director, when I was looking to hire a ranger, my very first ranger I ever hired, he said there's two kinds of rangers. He says there's nail pounders, and there's guys that are good at fixing stuff, and there's guys who get nail pounders. He said, you want the second one. Andy's pretty handy, but I can also tell you that Andy is good at getting somebody to do whatever it needs to get done. He might talk to you now about something he wants done next spring, and then that'll go on the job list. But Andy's good at getting nail pounders, and that was a good thing for us. Let's see. Talked about the money. Talked about the retreat. And I guess one of the things that when I first started in this role, and I knew that money was going to be an issue, the council, everybody said the council should do this or the council should fund that. The reality was there was no way for years, even if everything turned around right, there was no way that the council was going to take it out of their budget or have it in their budget to come and do whatever we needed to do here or wanted to do here. So I knew that when I hired some other volunteers to go raise it. And then one of my goals too was that if we could, whatever money we put into camp, whether we built the cabin or whatever, if we could get a 4% return on the money we put into that's the same as putting money into the endowment, because our return at that time, we were taking out 4%. So you got the program and you got the return. And the goal was for every building or every cabin we remodeled or whatever we added, was that if it returned a few $100 or 4% or whatever, then as long as you kept on doing that, you could keep adding and keep building, because every time you did something, your margin got better, right? You're bigger. And that worked. And I think it probably still works to a degree. But when I was here, the cabins with the bats and the mice and the doors that didn't shut, and I think back on Dave Patterson is here too. He's a commissioner in this for summer camps now too, I think. But Dave was here. He was one of the scoutmasters when I was district executive. And if you know Dave will tell you what he thinks if you know him. And so I'm the program director, and it's my first winter. I don't even really know what winter camp is hardly. And he has been to camp here, and one time everything's full of snow, and there was no wood cut that one. They hadn't cut any wood because it was just something I guess we didn't do. But we didn't have a chainsaw on the property. Can you imagine a property like this and no chainsaw? And so I thought, well, how am I going to get an 8 chainsaw? So I went and asked the scout executive for 2 chainsaws. figuring I maybe I'd get one. I got 0. So there was a guy named Chainsaw Jake. That was his nickname. Remember Jake?
Yeah.
Jake was somebody that I kind of connected with for some reason. Well, Jake and some other people helped cut wood for several years, and there used to be a kind of a bark shed back here we used to fill up. But Jake was something else, and he would bring out this. They'd have this tractor, and it had this big wheel, a big blade on there, no guards or anything. And I remember him bringing that out there, and I'm thinking, man, I hope nobody gets hurt here, because I'm sure that's an OSHA violation just sitting there. But it was a lot of fun for me personally, very rewarding for me to be involved with camp. I come back now and I enjoy seeing it. I especially enjoyed the guys and staff members that were here in like 1989, 1990. Joel and a lot of you guys. There's a lot of those guys that went on for the next 4 or 5 or 6 years, and a lot of those guys are still kind of the camp alumni, or that's a lot of the same kind of age group. But a pretty strong group of people that were on camp staff at that time, and I don't take any credit for that because I didn't recruit them. They were on camp staff before I ever got here. But and our ability to attract scouts from other councils was a big deal. And Wilderness is a very pretty place, and when I talk to my board and other boards and their councils, if you want to talk about a good campus, it's the camp staff's the #1 thing. If you got good camp staff, you'll be good. The second thing is good equipment, the toys that the kids play with. Those are the first 2. The third thing is the facility, and I mean the building. But I think our property, it lends itself to be probably the best, the prettiest scout camp I've ever been to. And then having the camp staff with that allowed us to kind of grow the camp to be what it is today with the facilities we've got. So. I come back every summer, and I'm able to be out on the water here as the kids get up in the morning, and when it's real still in the morning and the troops are getting up and I'm on the water, and you can hear across the lake, and if you want to hear about a couple hundred Boy Scouts getting up about 7:30 in the morning and you hear what 12-year-olds have to say, it's pretty hilarious. You sit on your boat listening to these guys and what they talk about. But when I was a kid, I wanted to camp, cook, canoe, and burn stuff in the fire. That's why I joined the Boy Scouts. And because of all the work that a lot of volunteers and the camp staff members and some of the guys in this room, because of all those people, our kids today can camp, cook, canoe, and burn stuff in the fire here at Camp Wilderness. So, thank you.
When you're ready, yeah. Okay. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Justin Nyland. Worked at camp for about 8 years of my life. Way back in the 90s/2000s, I'm in that Bridge Gap area there. Kind of nervous right now. I haven't been back here for a very long time. Getting a lot of memories flooded back in, a lot of good ones, some bad and kind of stuff, but it's always good. When Soper asked me to do this, I kind of would reflect on myself and what I would talk about. And my mind went to a blank. I have no idea what to talk about. I could talk about the buildings that were built while I was here, the trees that were cut down while I was here, the different changes in programs and that kind of stuff. But my brain shut off, so I let my heart run for it. And what I want to talk about is the staff. That's why I'm here. That's why I think all the kids come. That's why Wilderness is what it is. When I was a scout, I came from Frazee as a Cub Scout. Came here, I think 1 year. Then we moved to Sabin, Minnesota, and I joined a troop there, and that was Troop 666 at the time. Shortly after returned to 696. Reasons. But we were known as the Devil Troop. We were very boisterous. We were very loud, but we had a lot of fun. But what allowed us to have the fun was the staff. No one told us to shut up or go away or stop. No, they told us to stop, but it was in a good way. Stop us from getting hurt, not from having fun. Yeah. The biggest memories I have of the staff is, yes, the programs. They taught us everything we know. I know a lot of stuff right now. My kids will tell me that I know everything. I don't know everything, but I know a lot of stuff about I know a little bit about a lot of stuff because of the camp staff and the merit badges I got and the stuff I was taught. But when the program ended is when the staff really started shining for me. Back when I was a scout, I think I look back, even when I was a staff member, and that was like the shining moment of when the staff was like at their peak. The people who are on staff, to me, still shine brightest forever. So when this program ended, there was really nothing to do. Yes, there was other stuff to do, but it was really, you had your free time to go around. There was always staff in the pines in the middle that you could go sit with and talk, share some stories with, even just sit behind them and just watch them interact, and see how they loved each other and cared for each other and taught each other while no one was watching, kind of thing. We were always watching. And then as you keep going and you go get your dinner, you sit at your table with your dinner, a staff member would always be there for you. And they'd eat with you, and that was magical. So this person who was teaching me all day is now sitting with me eating a meal, and that seemed weird. They can go back to their cabins, they can go stay outside, they can go in a group, but they never did. They sat with you and ate with you, and that was good. It was magical. And then the sun went down, and you go back to your campsites, and they're way back in the woods. As you know, you're a scout, so you're way back. You went to North Star when I was a kid, and you couldn't drive to North Star campsite. You had to walk all the way through to haul your stuff back there. So you were isolated, you were alone, with just you and your scouting friends and family in your troop. And you start a campfire and you're goofing around and you're playing stupid games and your scoutmaster is yelling at you for stop playing stupid games. You may be making a treat and that kind of stuff, some dessert, pineapple upside down cake or drop donuts were our two favorite ones. But all of a sudden, at the threshold of your campsite, out in the middle of nowhere, you would hear, "Hey staff," "Hey scouts," and it'd be staff members sitting at your door, basically knocking at your campsite. And as, again, kids who have just seen these guys teach you, and like I said, they're like your glowing stars, they're now in your campsite. And they would sit with you, and they would sit there in your campfire area, and they would tell you stories, or they'd play stupid games with you, or teach you new stupid games that your scoutmaster would yell at you for. They would enjoy your desserts with you as well, if you had desserts, or they would sometimes bring their own. But there it was. You were a young scout, barely 13 years old, if not 10. It's kind of a thing. Figuring out who you are and what your life is going to be. And there's this God sitting next to you, telling you about their life and how they struggled and how they overcome, and now they're a staff member and how great it is and that kind of stuff. And you go, okay, that's what I want to be. I want to be something like that. So I did. I kind of, grew into it a little bit and had some mentors along the way. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention, John DeWord was the guy who got me to be a staff member. He taught me how to use my first weed whacker. He taught me how to drive stick with the old green monster that if you didn't shift it, it would die. And he made me shift it so it didn't die, kind of thing. And then he brought me into Scoutcrafts and showed me Scoutcrafts and that kind of stuff. And I still remember my hiring process. I was a CIT for a whole summer, which usually if you're a CIT, it's a week or two and that kind of stuff. I just stayed. They couldn't get rid of me. Kristen Vaughn was the manager and Brad Olson was the assistant at the time, and they just couldn't kind of get rid of me, so I just stayed. The year after that, I was like, I'm doing it again, but I'm going to be an intern this time. Because I remember they made me choose other areas besides Scoutcrafts to CIT at, so I had to go to nature. But an intern can choose where they want to be, so I chose to be an intern at Scoutcrafts. I stayed here for about a week, and then I had a camping trip with my dad. I got back from that, and Kristen and Brad pulled me into their office and said, hey, we lost a staff member while you were gone. Do you want to be a full-time staff member? And I remember looking at my dad, and I was like, is it okay? And he's like, yes, and because I was going to be here anyways, so I didn't get paid for it. So I became a staff member with Scoutcrafts in '96, I think it was. From there, I progressed through my thing, my career here, Scoutcraft Aide, Scoutcraft Aide, Scoutcraft Aide, assistant director, and then I became director of Scoutcrafts myself, which that was a big moment. I became a director of an area, Scoutcrafts, which is the one I love the most. I called it, I get the magic of Scoutcraft. It's got Scoutcraft magic pumped inside me, which I still use today with my kids and everyone around me. But again, that was just the program area. What followed me through was that once program ended, now what do? We have our cabins, we can go back to our cabins. We get days off, we could go take a day off, we could go back into Park Rapids if we wanted to. But there are scouts here that need your guidance and your help. So the best thing to do, that I love to do, was to take either my fellow scouts or staff members, my scouts with me, or just myself, and walk to a random campsite. I would walk down the northern or west to south trails here, and I would just wait to hear if I could hear some scouts, see if they're having fun or if they're in their campsites. And if I could hear them, I knew they were there, so I would walk up and I would go to the threshold and I would say, "Hey, scouts," and I have never been turned away once, which was good, so they would welcome me in, and I would play stupid games, show them stupid games, and I would sit with them and tell them things, and I would throw things in the fire with them, and have desserts if they had desserts, and then I would go off into the mist again. But as I left, I would kind of stop outside, and I would listen to see if they had the same reaction that I had as a scout when the staff members left, and that was, "Oh my God, did you hear that? Did you see that? They were there. They were here." And it was just like, that was heartwarming. And you just kind of fade off into the mist, and the next day they would see you at your area again, and you would teach them more stuff, and they would, all how great it was, and maybe that shy kid that was sitting at the table, 2 tables away from you while you're doing leatherworking was now sitting right next to you on leatherworking, and it just showed you how much of a bond that was. So for me, as I think back on what it was, it's not the pines and birches that made Camp Wilderness what it was. It was those who are among them really made it who it was for me, and who it still is. Coming back on the 75th anniversary after being gone for quite a long time, like I said, it's a flood of emotions, a lot of good ones. Seeing faces that I haven't seen in a long time, new faces, hearing old stories I've never heard before, besides reading them in books maybe, or seeing some stuff. But yeah, that's me. That's my story. I just hope that the other staff will continue on for this, and I will be here for the 100th anniversary or something. Or maybe I'll be back with these guys. So.
Perfect. Sounds good. All right, hey guys. So you might see me look at my phone a couple times just because I have dates written down. I'm super bad at remembering when things happened, so if I'm not 100% accurate, don't get mad at me. So I guess I'll kind of preface this by saying, scouting in Camp Wilderness definitely saved my life. I remember a long time ago, kind of really going through a rough patch where, my parents had gotten divorced and I was having a lot of identity issues and things were just going crazy for me in school. And everything was all wild and just hectic and crazy. But I remember the only thing that was super constant for me was going to my troop meetings. And then the only thing that I really looked forward to out of the whole year was coming to summer camp. That 1 week that I could come here. And I remember having amazing counselors like Brandon and other people who would teach me different skills and things. I remember a lot of great things like nature and insect study and all kinds of awesome things. And those were the things I really look forward to. And that's one of the reasons why camp was such a foundation of my life, something that I always look forward to. And that was one of the reasons why I decided to become a camp staff member. And man, has that been the best decision I ever made in my life. I started working at camp in 2015 as the OA coordinator here. And I did that for 4 years. And then after that, I was a business manager for a few years. And you hear a lot of people talk about, the camp staff family and stuff. And I'll tell you, the members of camp staff that I've gotten to know, have really changed my life, and they have become my family. Because, I really don't have a whole lot of friends and things outside of Scouts or a lot of social connections, and this is really where I blossomed. I used to be super shy, and I hated talking in front of people. And being a member of camp staff allowed me to eventually build up the confidence to run for lodge chief. I was a Pine Lodge chief in 2017, and then I eventually became section chief, and I did that for 2 terms. And I traveled all across the country, talking to different people and stuff. It was super amazing, and that's what camp really did for me. And I kind of laugh about it now. I'm thinking back to some of the previous presenters who were talking about how they would do all these funny pranks and things that were super exciting. And I was thinking back when Chris asked me to speak here, I'm like, dang, you know what? I probably have hundreds of stories I could tell you guys, but I was on camp staff last summer, and I'm pretty recent, so I can't share too many stories with you, unfortunately. Talk to me at the 100th, maybe I'll tell you a lot more. I don't want to get people in trouble. But oh my goodness, no, I started in 2015, and this past summer was the first summer I haven't worked out here, and that was really heartbreaking for me, because I got back a couple times. Like I really look forward to being here. And so I'm kind of thinking, the first year that really sticks out to me, they're all super important and super fantastic. But something really monumental happened, and that was in 2016. I don't know if you guys were here for that when the big storm rolled through. I know another presenter was talking about another big storm in the past. That was super crazy. Oh my gosh. So I remember, we all being called into storm shelters. Now we have the new storm shelters, but we had to go to either the nature lodge or the adult bathrooms or the dining hall. And there were trees falling down all over the place, lightning cracking. It was crazy. It was honestly something like you'd see in a movie. It was unreal. We all kind of hid out in these storm shelters, and trees fell down all over the place. The staff was really efficient at getting everybody in, and there were trees that fell down on top of tents that night, and people would have died if we wouldn't have gone into shelters. And that's super crazy to think about. And I remember right after that storm, and we all kind of walked out, and it was crazy. There were trees that were down on top of buildings. There were tents that were smashed. There was this church van that was out in the parking lot. I don't know if anybody knows, but this church van was smashed, done, total that thing. It was crazy. And I remember the council, or there were some council dignitaries or whatnot, I don't really know their titles, and they were like, you know what guys, we probably aren't going to be able to do camp the rest of the summer. We got to refund everybody, everybody got to go home. It was crazy. But the staff really pulled together. We were out there working nonstop hours. We weren't sleeping very much. We're out there clearing trees and getting stuff, and so many trees had fallen down on the roads where we weren't able to get any vehicles in. They had to get a logging company to come cut their way through, and I think it took almost a week to get through there. The power was out, the Wi-Fi was out. I know that sounds kind of crazy. I'm sure y'all never had Wi-Fi back in the day, talking about some of these earlier eras. But for someone like me, not having Wi-Fi, I'll tell you, oof. But no, gosh, we really worked hard. We got it all cleared out. A lot of cell phones were dying, so we had to rely on, because we didn't have power, we had to rely on the radios and stuff like that. And it was a time. We had to move a lot of the food back and forth between the trading post and anywhere that we could keep it cold, because we still had to feed these scouts like everyone was gonna starve. And that whole experience was awesome, because it made me realize that, despite what everybody was saying, we had to close camp, despite everybody saying that we had to send everybody home and that it was such a terrible thing, I think what really came out of that was the realization that our camp staff is super amazing, and we're a great team, and we're able to work together and make anything happen. And that was, the 2016 storm, man, it was such a wild time. 2017 was super cool too. I think that was the last, I gotta check my notes here, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, so that was the first time that the new climbing tower was put in. For some of you guys who remember the old one, I think it's still up there. It's kind of rickety, shakes. You go up on the top, it probably moves about 4 feet back and forth. That new climbing tower came in 2017, and I also remember one of the things that we did that summer was, and I think it was organized by Jacob Steiner, who was on camp staff, worked at Trailblazers for quite a number of years. And he was volunteering, and he was kind of like an admin assistant that summer for a little bit, aside from doing Trailblazers. And we did this thing, another staff team building thing called raft races. That was super cool. So the idea was you could break up into any groups, any teams you wanted, and you would have to build a raft, and you would then race these rafts out around a buoy out at waterfront and come back to the shore, and that was the idea. And probably the funnest element of this whole thing was that sabotage was allowed. So I know. So all kinds of wild things happened because of that, and it was super fun. So we would all go out at night, we're sneaking around trying to find each other's rafts, ooh, how can we mess these up? How can we win? Super fun. So everybody was hiding their raft in the woods or different program areas, trying to conceal it with brush and leaves so nobody could see where their raft was when they're secretly building it during the day. And I remember my group, we had ours down at fishing. I think it was off in the woods somewhere in the weeds or in the cattails or something, I don't remember. But we built our raft out of these logs. And there were some groups who were really smart, and they're like, we're gonna buy a bunch of cool noodles and duct tape from Walmart and lash this thing together, and it's gonna be super lightweight, and it's gonna be awesome for this race. And of course, really easy to hide because it's just made out of pool noodles. But we made ours out of these logs, and it was super cumbersome, heavy as heck. I remember Brandon Martin, who worked in the trading post for a number of years in the pump house too, was nonstop drinking 2 liters of cream soda to help us with our raft, because we needed as many 2 liters as we could to lash to this cumbersome piece of wood that we're somehow supposed to float through the water. And oh my gosh, it was awesome. I think we rigged up a mast to it and had the Jolly Roger on that thing. We were pirates. It was so sweet. We finally got that. It was the day of the raft race. We got that thing in the water. And I think it took 2 or 3 motorboats. We had to hook them up to our raft to tow this thing to waterfront. This thing was going nowhere. It floated. It was all right. But it was not going to be very good in a race. But anyway, it was awesome. It was very glorious. We had the Pirates of the Caribbean theme music going. Somebody was standing majestically on our raft as we towed it over there. It was awesome. Wind blowing in our hairs. So glorious. We got it over there. Needless to say, we didn't win. It didn't go very far. But we had people jump out and try to swim and push it and pull it. Oh gosh, that was such a cool memory. 2017 was also very cool. That was actually the year of the raft race. So 2018, the next year, was the last year that we had the merry-go-round at Trailblazers over there. A lot of fun memories on that, of spinning really fast and flying off. That was super cool. But that's the time that they finally retired that and ended up. I think they at one point tried to build this above ground kitchen with some lashed together sticks and mud so they could cook with coals and stuff. So that's what they did with that, and that was really interesting. Another memory that I have, and so I'm very much a nerd about camp, and I like going places that I don't know where they're at. And I always looked at the map in the History Center and saw this really small little lake. It was called Pine Lake, kind of looks like a triangle, way off up there on the map. I don't even know what direction it is, probably north if it's up. But yeah, I'm a great Boy Scout. But I remember sitting there at trading post, and I'm like, gosh darn it, I really want to figure out how to get out here. And Steve Sharp walks in. I know some of you guys know Steve. He's like, oh, I know everywhere at this camp. So I'm like, oh, cool. Well, you should show me where this is sometime. So then after work that day when we got out of the trading post, he brought me out there. And Bridget O'Keefe as well. She was working in the trading post that year. And we went out there, and it was one of those magical things that are in camp that it's so inaccessible. There's no trails to it. There's the canopy and the brush is so thick that you need to guess pretty much where this thing is going to be. I'll walk in a direction, try to find it. And I remember Steve called it bushwhacking, where you have to go through and freaking move the weeds out of the way. And you were lucky sometimes if you're able to find a break in the canopy enough to look and see these giant trees growing on the banks of that lake, and that's pretty much how you find your way there. And it seemed like you were walking for hours. It was probably only like an hour, but it was crazy. And so we found it. It was really cool. I enjoyed seeing it. And then probably a year or two later, I was talking to my good buddy Ryan Hansen. And Ryan worked at Scoutcrafts and climbing and stuff too. And I think he's a district executive right now in the council. And I was like, he was talking to him. He's like, you know, I really want to go see that. Like, I want to go find it. And I'm like, you know what? I've been there one time. I bet I can find our way back. So Ryan and I, you know, I think we're wearing swim trunks too, because we had the bright idea where we're going to go swimming in this lake. And of course, that's a great idea to go walking through brush so thick with swim trunks on. Such a smart idea. We were walking through the brush, and we definitely got turned around a bunch of times. I'm like, where are these trees? Where are these? Oh my gosh, trying to find the breaks in the canopy. We make it there. I'm like, yes, I'm a master wayfinder. I am super great at my scout skills. We found it, yeah. And then on the way back, it was getting dark. It was like, oh my gosh, our legs were all cut up from sticks. We never ended up going swimming. It was a bad idea. It got dark, and we couldn't really see these big, like we saw the big tree canopies, but we really didn't know what direction we were. We walked around the lake a while, and we were out in the middle of nowhere, and we were like, okay, well, we kind of have an idea. We kind of see our trail. Let's walk this way for a while. And we probably walked for 3 hours. Our phones were dying. We're like, oh my God, we're gonna have to spend the night here. That's what's gonna have to happen. We're gonna have to sleep in the weeds. And then we ended up finding just enough signal out there where one of us, I don't remember who, was able to pull up Snapchat on their phones, because that's the era we're talking about right now. Open up Snap Map and like, okay, where are these Bitmojis? Where are our friends? Let's go this direction. And we were finally able to find our way back. My goodness, that was quite the experience. But yeah, no, there's so many stories, so many wonderful ideas and things that I want to share with you guys about camp, but we don't have enough time. Some of the most meaningful things that I've taken away from this whole experience is that, everybody here is family and we're all connected. Talking through all these different eras of camp, the things that really unite all of these stories are that they're taking place here. It's the story of Camp Wilderness is very locked to this location, but Camp Wilderness itself isn't the dirt road lined by the Scout Oath and Law signs, right? Camp Wilderness isn't the pump house. It isn't the nature lodge or the trading post. I think Camp Wilderness is all of the stories that we have and all of the memories. And Camp Wilderness, to me, is more often experienced around a campfire in Fargo, North Dakota, hanging out with friends who used to be on camp staff, or going out to a bar and BSing about all the wonderful stories and talking about all kinds of pranks we pulled at camp back in the day. That's camp to me, reminiscing about all these stories, and I think that's what we're sharing here. Summer camp lasts forever, but we just kind of take breaks in between, and I think that's the important thing. Like, some of us might come to camp 1 year, and we might never come back. And some of us might come back after a few years, but I think the important thing to remember is nobody ever leaves here once they come, and that camp is always in these stories that we tell. So, thanks everybody, that's my presentation.
Hello, I'm a little bit awkward because Alright, so my name is Brandon Michael Vandenykel, and I've been on camp staff off and on, mostly on, since 2008, but I actually want to start back a little bit sooner than that. My first time coming to Camp Wilderness was in 2002, and I was a Webelow Scout. So at that, what is now called Arab Light, but year 2 of Webelow. And so at that time, of course, the Camp Butler, as we know it, didn't exist yet, and so we had Cub Scout camp on this side of camp, and my Scoutmaster, like all the typical leaders, couldn't come, so we just had 2 mom volunteers who I love very much. They were very brave, and they took us to camp, but they were like, I don't think we can deal with tents. So we stayed in cabin 11. And the reason I want to bring that up is, one of the previous people talked about how the cabins have changed and the buildings have changed. Cabin 11 looks so different now than it did when I was a Webelow Scout. And I've actually later on lived in Cabin 11 as a staff, so I've stayed in it on a couple different times, so it's kind of interesting. But yeah, so one of the things I remember that happened that year, or that summer, that we no longer did later on, is the Voice of God, or that storm siren. It is such a blessing to be able to have, this device that alerts the whole camp. Well, when we had a storm when I was a little wee below, some poor staff member just stood drenched in the rain, ringing the bell constantly, hoping that we'd all hear it. And so I just remember looking at them just soaked as we're like being rushed into the dining hall at that time. And all the staff was like quickly rearranging the tables and benches so we all had places to sit. Whereas now, we used to be spread out between all these different buildings for storms. Then we started to condense into like 2 or 3. And then now we have 2 large, really fancy storm shelters. One at the Cub Scout camp and one here on the Scout BSA side. So then fast forward a little bit, I attended, Scout camp here. But then, like I said, my first year on staff was in 2008, and I worked at the Nature Lodge. And I worked there for 2 years as a nature aide, then the next year as assistant director, and then 3 years as director. So for those 6 years, so much happened. Like Evan talked about, when I first came to camp, I did not have a lot of like social skills, and I very much struggled. Like at home, I had moved from Pierre, South Dakota. I was going to school in Fort Pierre, and I had some friends there. And then I started school in Frazee in 3rd grade. And while small towns can be super wonderful, one criticism that you might have of some communities is that when you move in, it can be hard to kind of be included into that group, right? So my brother and sister, they were young enough, they were, they started preschool in Frazee, they always fit in really well. I never really did. Thankfully, there was always like 1 or 2 kids that felt bad for me. So I always had somebody I spent time with, but it wasn't until I got here in camp staff and started teaching these nature classes. One of my favorite classes to teach at that time was astronomy. At that time, I thought I knew a lot about astronomy, and I knew a lot about the information, but I couldn't find constellations, and so I still feel guilty to this day. I should probably let it go. But like, I had my printout of my star chart, and I'm out there in the activity field with the other scouts, and it's like, okay, I think, okay, take a look at this star, right? This one has to be it, and then guiding them through, and I've come so far. By the end of those 6 years, I had ordered myself like a green laser, was able to like accurately point out stars, identify them, and it turned into a camp-wide program. And so that's just one example of how I came, I really struggled at first, but just could grow so much just as a human and as a teacher through my experiences here. And that was all before I even went to school, and now I have a degree in teaching, and I've been teaching 6 years since then. I teach elementary music. So you would have thought after all those years at nature, I probably would have taught science. Truth is, I could probably teach anything as long as I have the knowledge. I just enjoy working with scouts and people. And then the other thing that I always think about is when I look at pictures of me as a 16-year-old staff member, I just think I was like so weird. I'm like, why were kids even friends with me? Like, why did scouts enjoy my classes? And I think, now after being at camp staff all of these years, what has stood out to me the most are those relationships that you build. At the time, I was just like, desperate for friends, and they were the ones who were like nice to me. So of course I'm going to hang out with these scouts. Like, they're kind to me. They would invite me to their campsite. I'm going to go. And then I found that I really enjoyed doing that. So then I started going to campsites most evenings, and then every single week. And through that experience, I've gotten to know so many people. And then when I came here, I felt like I mattered, right? And that just like, I don't know, the confidence I could not get at home, I was able to get here. And then finally, it did start to stick. It's like, maybe I can like feel a little more confident at home too. So then later I went back, and then I got into a couple musicals and started to like do more with choir, and then that's eventually what kind of led me into teaching music. But had it not been for working at Camp Wilderness, I don't know that I would have been a teacher. I'm not exactly sure what would have happened. So teaching astronomy was excellent. The other exciting thing I'm thinking about during my time at nature I was also the Ordinary coordinator. Previously, it was not a full position as it is now, which is really unfortunate because it really is such a tough role. And so you would, the people who came before me, and then the couple years I was the OA coordinator, you would have your normal camp position, plus you do all your OA stuff on top of it. And so I would give up pretty much all of my lunch in the evening, and like lunch and dinner breaks, and every evening, plus trying to make all that happen. But what I loved about that, this was just another opportunity to experience like a different side of camp. And so I was involved with lots of call-out ceremonies and brotherhood ceremonies. Like maybe that also led to like my love of theater. You know, it all kind of intertwines, I think. And you just never know exactly what experience at camp will impact you the most. And I think those are the ones that stood out to me there. Then I was all ready. I can't remember exactly which year I wrote it down. Must have been, so yeah. So then in 2014, for like the third summer in a row, I was like, okay, this one's gonna be my last summer, one more summer at nature. And then I was trying to be, going to school to be a teacher. I was just about ready to graduate. I needed to start focusing on that. I was working for the council in just like a paraprofessional position at the time. Brad Olson calls me into his office and it's like, Brandon, I know you really would like to spend your last year at the Nature Lodge, but we need somebody as a program director at the Cub Scout camp. And in the back of my mind, I'd always thought it'd be cool to work at that Cub Scout camp at some point, because I was never there as a scout, but I think the Cub Scout program is really important. And so then I thought about it, I was like, oh gosh, I love the Nature Lodge. Literally it was Nature Brandon. This was my identity. I had a Facebook page. People called me Nature Brandon outside of camp. People I didn't even know. But I did say yes because Brad always has led me in the right direction. And I loved being at the Cub Scout camp. Being the program director is such a unique role because you really get to dabble in every single area. So I would never worked at the waterfront here, but you better believe I was a fake lifeguard. Like I pull kids right out of the out of the water. It's like you don't have to rescue them; they're just right there and they're little. And so then you get to feel like a superhero. Be like, don't worry, it's fine. And so I got to do that. I also feel and one of the downsides of camp the last few years is we've been understaffed on both sides. But one of the benefits was, again, I filled in all these areas. So I also was the shooting sports director for a while. So I learned a lot about shooting BB guns and bow and arrow. And I think I was a village guide at almost every age level at some point. And so it ended up really benefiting me in my administration journey because then I could better understand exactly what those staff were doing. And it really made me appreciate, now that I've gone back and forth to the camps, it's there is so much that they offer, and the fact that our council can run 2 camps is such an incredible opportunity, and that there's a lot of similarities, but they really are such different programs. After that year as program director, I had taken a year off, and so I could actually focus on getting started in my classroom. But then I came back and was the camp director at Cub Camp for 2 years, and which connects to your story about the storm. That was my first year as camp director when that storm came through. And we completely lost power and water of all kind at Cub Camp. On this side, the water is still connected to the emergency generator. On our side, it is not. So we literally had to haul water in containers from the Boy Scout camp, or now the Scouts BSA camp, to Cub Camp. And after a day and a half of no toilets, no water, no power, I remember just being so overwhelmed, sitting at my desk, and it's for the first time in my life, I have a salary. I am fully employed. Why am I still here? I keep coming back. And then later that day, hours later, I heard somebody come out of the bathroom. I was like, oh, the power must be back on. And so I went to use the bathroom, I heard that toilet flush. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. And then Evan said, we worked together so hard to make sure camp could keep running. And my own pack was there that week, and so it's just so funny that happened to kind of work through there. And made it through. The rest of the summer ended up being excellent. I came back as another camp director, and then, because I kind of go where I'm called, they needed somebody to be the lead commissioner back on this side, and we had some folks who were ready to take over for me at Cub Camp. So then I ended up making my way back to the Scouts BSA side as the lead commissioner. And that was another role. I was very nervous because it's oh, now I love Cub Camp, right? I love nature. And then Brad told me to move, and I loved that, so that was perfect. So I was okay, I think this would be a good role. I've been at camp now for way too long, so I do know a lot of things. And I was like, well, maybe I'll miss teaching the kids. You know, I won't get to impact Scouts anymore. But what I quickly realized, and lots of you probably already knew this, is working with adults is such a really cool thing, because you can see, if you can get them excited to be leaders, they're then going to bring that back to their youth. And so, like, in a roundabout way, I figured out I'm still impacting Scouts, just in a very different way. And now I teach kids all year long, so it's like maybe it's okay to switch my audience up a little bit. So I know all of my stories have been very convoluted, but I tried to give you a little timeline. A couple of other random things that came up when I was brainstorming what to talk about. Going back to my WeGo camp, something that we did then that we'll never do ever again, and that's okay, is we had slingshot wars with marshmallows. I don't know if anybody's talked about that over these things, but I will always remember it because I was such a scared, afraid kid. So this was not my comfort zone, but we still had a lot of fun. With slingshot, and they split the camp into 2 big teams. It was on the play field, and then the staff would help. And then they had this huge slingshot that, so kind of like if you get those big water balloon ones, so, a couple staff would be on this side, a couple staff would be on this side, and they'd start on one team, and, they'd load maybe 20, 50, I don't know, just a whole wad of marshmallows, and they'd launch it and just rain on the other team. But you wanted to have this person on your team for the second half, because eventually, you're reusing these marshmallows, they get stickier and nastier. And so halfway through, they go to the other side, and now it's a huge conglomerate, giant marshmallow glob, right? And so they launch it, and I remember it hit some poor kid in the chest, and it dropped him, just launched him over, because it was marshmallows, right? You think it's so painless, but not when they get all melty and nasty. And so anyway, everybody's fine. It was very fun. It's okay that we don't do that anymore, though, however. But I do remember that time. And then, let's see, some of the other changes that I remember. When I first, as a scout, I was in the old campfire area, as many of you probably were, and I don't remember which year, but I got to be on staff. It was supposed to be ready, the new area, at the beginning of the summer. It wasn't quite there because we had a lot of weather. And so we started the season at the old campfire area, and then partway through, we had an opening campfire there and then a closing campfire in the new area. And I just remember thinking oh my gosh, I knew that was a big moment. And so I'm still sad about that old area, that old campfire area, so many memories, but this new one really is such a beautiful facility, and just is the promise that this camp can continue to grow and continue to impact so many people. The other things I wrote down really probably aren't that interesting, except for me. So if you have other things you want to know about, I'm certainly happy to explain. But my biggest conclusion is, I've always hoped that I've had a huge impact on Scouts and adults here. But they've had the most impact on me. And I would not have the job that I have, or the confidence I have, or to even be alive had it not been for these experiences here. So thank you very much.
The whole topic, or the theme that I wanted to deal with, is from life to eagle, and then from eagle to life. And from life to eagle, we know it's a fairly steady path that we have to take. It's well defined. But from eagle to our adult life is not as well defined. We're going to come to many, many crossroads. And then the question, I think, becomes, will the paths I take and the decisions I make be influenced from my years of scouting? And that it was back in the 1960s that I was a scout here. And we came here for our summer camp. We came here for our winter camp. We came here for fall conclave for Order of the Arrow. And I grew up in Benson, Minnesota, so about 130 miles south of Park Rapids. And so Troop 480. We spent a lot of time here. Some of the badges I still had, I pulled out just to kind of remember through that. Some of the merit badges that were worked on along the way, and much of that was done here at the camp. You see the top row of these 6 that I've highlighted, the top row pretty much deals with nature. It's conservation, it's wildlife management, and everything else. The bottom 3 that I put here are certainly related to the top 3, and as I go through, I think you'll see how in that. But I've highlighted these for a reason. I think that Emerson put it best when he said, lose yourself in nature and find peace. I've turned to nature many times throughout my life for focus, for inspiration, for that peace of mind, and for purpose. And my purpose has always been to try to connect others to nature. And I started that with, young kids, and I wanted to connect them from head to toe. So I started with our own kids when they were young. And here's Scott and Sarah, Carrie and Scott are as little kids. I took them down to the river to feed the ducks in the wintertime. And it was really rewarding for me to see as Carrie grew up and became a mother of her own, there she was back at the same river with her son, Cole, and carrying on that kind of tradition or that nature type thing. And Scott too, with his two sons. There, I don't know if you can see with the lighting, he's holding a turtle. And the backstory to that is when he was about that age, he was with me on a photo trip. And as I came into the access in the canoe, I was loading the canoe and he found a turtle on the shore. And he picked it up and he was looking at it and he got a little too close. He had it head on and he was looking and the turtle just popped his head back in the shell. So Scott got a little closer yet and that head came out, latched right onto his lip. And I heard this, and I turned and here's this turtle hanging from my son's lip. So I see here he's holding the turtle with the head away from him. And that maybe trying to teach his boys what not to do. As a teacher too, throughout 34 years of teaching, one of my priorities was always to connect kids to nature by combining inside classroom lessons with outside nature activities, hands-on activities. So we did the usual things. We went snowshoeing in the school forest. We built birdhouses, and I found out how important partnerships were. A partnership between the school, the home, and the community. So we called on many of the community groups, DNR, foresters, wildlife, fisheries, helped us with many things. And the Mantrap Valley Conservation Club, that's the MVCC you see on the birdhouse, their clubhouse is right down the road as you leave camp. And since 1993, they have furnished the cutout pieces for bluebird houses for every one of our fifth graders in Park Rapids. And to date, that is still going on. And I figured it out the other day, fifth graders have now made over 3,000 birdhouses thanks to that partnership that began way back in the 90s. We did some unusual things too that weren't really in our textbook. We went with researchers to bald eagle nests when they were still, way back when they were still climbing and bringing eaglets down for banding. And for the students that went with, it was great because as the researcher was climbing 70 feet up into a white pine, he noticed that all of us had cameras with him. He said, "Give me your cameras." He put them in his backpack, took them up 70 feet with him, and took a picture of the eaglet in the nest for each of those kids and for myself, and then sent the cameras down in his backpack before he captured the eaglet and brought that down in the backpack so we could band it and the kids could feel the heartbeat and everything. It was really a really nice hands-on experience. For those students that weren't able to go, it was a summer day when we went. A lot of students don't want to give up a summer day, but these did. But we also had a rehabilitated eagle released on our school grounds so that everybody became a part of that. And we found out, we got the x-rays from the Raptor Center in the cities showing a fish hook in the stomach. And that's what they had to do surgery on and repair that. And then we released the eagle. But we also, every summer in July, we would go goose banding with DNR. So the kids, again, were willing to give up a day of summer vacation to be with the DNR members to capture and band Canada geese. And then, as you see with the bear cub, we, on several different occasions, we went with researchers to bear dens in the wintertime. So that as the researchers brought the hibernating female out to do a physical exam, to put a new radio collar on her, the kids had to hold the brand new cubs to keep them warm. And they didn't mind doing that one bit. The smile on that kid's face, it took about 2 weeks of math lessons to wipe that smile off his face. You know, he loved it. And you can see the female coming out of the den there. The next picture here is one of our students. We put the radio collar on her and sent her out in the woods so we could see how researchers follow, you know, and find the location of a bear. And then in the bottom row too, when we couldn't go with researchers for our wolf study, we brought the wolves into school instead. So we got a wolf learning kit from the Wolf Center in Ely, so we were able to use that. But then we also, with a few of the people I knew in the cities, they brought up a couple Arctic wolves. And so we had those right in school so the kids could see and have a presentation that way. And then each spring we would end up going to prairie chicken blinds so the kids could observe and film the booming of prairie chickens. And we would have to leave at 3:30 in the morning So again, it wasn't a trip that everybody wanted to go on, but for those that went. And we made it a parent or a grandparent-child type activity so they could share in that together, trying to bring the generations together through nature. And then we also spent a lot of time in Itasca State Park with the naturalists there as they helped with nature studies too. Dr. Thomas Berry said teaching children about their natural world should be treated as one of the most important events in their lives. You notice I crossed out there. I agree with him, but I also think it should be one of the most important things in our lives. And here was that picture of that eaglet that was 70 feet up in the nest that the researchers took for each of the kids that were there that day. That's kind of a neat view, isn't it? You know? Okay, when we went goose banding and built goose nest platforms, also with the students, then I wrote about it. I wrote about it in order to tell others what we were doing, and hopefully it would open doors for them to share with their students or 4-H kids or scouts, whatever, some of the same types of activities. When we went to prairie chicken blinds to photograph prairie chickens, I wrote about it. Again, for the same reasons. And here you see a father and a son together sharing that experience. When we went to the bear dens, and after I wrote about it, let me read that paragraph to you. It said, I watched as one of my students crouched in the snow and slid his upper body to the entrance of the bear den. It took his eyes a minute to adjust to the darkness, and as he moved the flashlight beam, he saw her, a mother black bear sleeping. Then from behind her, 2 little cubs stared curiously back at him. He pushed himself out from the den's entrance and looked at me. His eyes were as large as silver dollars, and for the first time all year, he was speechless. There was no way in holding back my smile. My students were having a safe, up-close, and personal encounter with the black bear, and I was part of it. The experience helped me remember why I became a teacher. Okay, in our reading program, we made sure we had a nature theme. So many of the things that we read, whether it be Hatchet, Wolf Shadows, and I Set the Mountain, all were connected with the studies we were doing at the time. Well, retirement came. It was a tough decision. I loved what I was doing. I loved the people I was working with. And it was really hard to write that letter. But at the same time, there were things that had been put on the back burner for a long time that I wanted to have more time for while I still had the health to do it. Some of that was writing, and some of it was naturally being behind the camera. So immediately the Park Rapids paper asked if I would do an outdoor column, a weekly column. So I stepped in and did that, and I wrote for another monthly publication as well. Some of the magazines that I was sending things to and getting published in were these either photographs or stories. And I did spend more time behind the camera. And as we go through just this minute and a half little slideshow here, what I like to tell kids when I'm with them too is we see everything in the magazines and on TV that's photographed in Africa, in Australia, in Alaska. You don't have to go there. It's great if you can. But this stuff is all either our backyard or a couple miles from Camp Wilderness on Mantrap Lake. Every one of these photos that I chose for this minute and a half were taken without doing all that travel, without all that expense. So kids with what they have can get involved with nature photography, at a basic level. And so we're about, let's see, there'll be a few more here, I think. And the pelicans on Mantrap in the spring, and then they all disappear about Memorial Day. Same with the swans. All the time we spend with this, and a lot of times it's hours and hours of sitting in the blind, it's all fun and I enjoy it, and I enjoy being in nature, but what I enjoy even more is sharing it with others and letting them have the experience. And by doing this myself, I was missing that component. I needed to get back to finding a way of sharing it with others, especially kids. So when that happens, you have to do something about it. Back to our own kids, when they were fairly young, here's Scott in 5th grade. Our son with a camera in his lap and a grouse and a drumming log. They shared that space and time. And our daughter, too, continued to go with me on different things. But they had now grown up and had lives of their own, I needed to start with a new generation. So here's one of our grandsons. He was the one that was just feeding swans a few slides back when he was just a little toddler. Here he is, maybe a year or two older. He'd be running around the house, and I'd say, hey, Cole, you want to take a picture of a bird? I would have the camera set up and pre-focused on the bird feeders on the deck. So he'd come over in his pajamas, hop up on the stool, click, 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 go back, run around and do other things. And just by doing it that way, without him sitting in a blind for hours and hours with me, he gained success in an interest. And so here he is a year or two later, back down at that same river where they fed the swans and the ducks, and he's photographing a mallard. When he was in 3rd grade, he came to stay, and he's a fisherman. Oh, he could fish 24 hours a day. And so he said, Grandpa, are we going fishing? And I said, yes, but we're going to take the cameras with too. I want you to take some pictures. Well, that day, one day, up here on Mantrap Lake, he took 436 pictures. I was so thankful we didn't have film and cameras in And he caught 119 panfish. He was counting. He kept 2 of them. He had a full day. As we started loading all his pictures in the computer, we naturally were deleting a lot of them. We're out of focus in that. But he came to this one, and he said, Grandpa, that's not a very good eagle picture, is it? And I looked at it and I said, Cole, how many eagle pictures have you taken in your lifetime? He said, well, just one. I said, so what you're really telling me is this is the very best eagle picture you've ever taken. He kind of chuckled, said, oh, yeah, I guess it is. I said, this is your starting point. Now you try to improve. So the next summer when he was in 4th grade, he came with, and again, we went fishing, but he had a goal he wanted to achieve. And I think he did. He took that photo as a 4th grader. And coincidentally, his elementary school is called Eagle View Elementary. So when we looked at this on the computer, he said, Grandpa, can we put a little text box on it that says Eagle View Elementary? And I said, sure. He sent that in to have a big blow-up, a big poster-sized blow-up, framed it, and gave it to his principal at school. And the last time I was in that school, it was still hanging in the office. That was a 4th grader. It's very possible. I thought that was pretty amazing, and evidently so did the newspaper. So they ran a big article on Cole and his connection to nature through photography. So seeing that again too, I thought that just made me want to do more and more. So because I was retired, I started trying to plan some kind of a project that would work with students in school or 4-H kids and put cameras in their hand so they could get connections to nature through photography. Our problem was always, where do you get the cameras? Most libraries had like 2 cameras, and that was about it. So finally, through a bunch of letters, Olympus came through. Olympus sent us 24 free cameras. So my brother-in-law and I, and he worked with the University of Minnesota 4-H with Native Americans on reservations. So we used his students and my old students from school as 2 pilot schools. Our goal was to reach 200 kids that first year. Well, by the end of the year, we reached 650. And we went way beyond the 2 schools we were working with. Olympus sent us another 20 cameras. And Carol Henderson, who was the non-game person for DNR for many years in St. Paul, started hearing about what we were doing. But these were some of the things we were doing. We were out in the field with kids. We saw the smiles on their face. We saw the imagination taking over. They'd take a picture, they'd show it to me, and I'd say, where'd you see that? They'd say, I walked right by it. My eyes didn't pick it out. Their creativity was amazing. Okay, girl that got a little close to a snake and loved every minute of it. Okay, so we went from thing to thing. Wildflower safaris up in Itasca State Park. Some of them wanted to take animal pictures naturally. With these little point-and-shoot cameras, you're limited. So we introduced them to blinds. We said if you sit in a blind, you can get fairly close without spooking the animal. So we put blinds by bird feeders in refuges and in state parks. And the blind doesn't have to be anything fancy. It can be a purchased one like hunters use. It can be as simple as a cardboard box. It didn't matter. But there they were, reaching their little cameras out there and photographing some of the birds that came into the feeders. It also was a way of bringing adults and kids together again to share that experience. Okay, we used GoPro cameras on remote control cars. That got the kids' attention. They go zipping that thing out to try to get a picture of something. We used 4-H as a sea perch project, underwater robotics, putting cameras on those so they could get that experience. We used digiscoping, where they could hook their little camera to a spotting scope and reach way out, maybe to get a picture of swans. Okay? We put them in ghillie suits, you know, that the military uses. And this one crawled up on this red squirrel to get a picture with his little bitty point shoot camera. We use the cameras on the iPads. We use them on the phones. Here's a picture that was taken with a phone of the doe nursing two fawns. They didn't need $1,000 cameras. Whatever they had was working. That's when Carol Henderson wrote and said, hey guys, what you're doing is exactly what I want to do on a bigger level. He was writing a program that would call for 500 cameras with a goal of in 2 years doing 80 workshops in Minnesota for teachers and reaching 1,000 teachers in 2 years to use digital cameras with their students to connect them to nature. Exactly what we were doing on a smaller scale. He asked us to be on the planning team for his project, which we said, yeah, sure. And then once the project was up and running in 2010, he asked if I would be the coordinator for the project for Greater Minnesota. So 2-year goal, 80 workshops, we surpassed that in 14 months. And we were off and running. We were able to do all the things we'd already been doing. But we expanded. We started using trail cameras too. So many people had trail cameras, and they could, there was a trail camera curriculum that many people weren't aware of. You could, deer hunters use them, definitely to find out what's coming through their hunting area. A bear may be coming through. Here's an eagle that was just on a dead pig that a farmer had thrown out there. And he had a trail camera there to see what would come in. Well, the eagle came in. Okay, here it's hard to see, but here's a loon on a nest with her 2 loon eggs, but 5 mallard eggs. She was incubating all of them. So we were able to start seeing things that were very unusual in our research. The thing about trail cameras is animals don't even really notice them. Or do they? That doe is sticking her tongue out right in the camera, So maybe once in a while they do notice. Okay, I also was able to get back to a lot of my wood duck study. Now, wood ducks take me back a long ways in scouting. My Eagle project was on wood ducks. And I built, I think it was 12 wood duck nesting boxes, put them out around wetlands in the area I grew up in, and then monitored the activity in them. And ever since then, I've been working with wood ducks. And so after retirement, too, I was able to work with the community and doing wood duck building and for the nesting boxes, and in school, too. I went in the industrial arts high school. The kids cut out the pieces, the biology department, and the kids built the houses. Then we put them out by the school forests where the lake areas were. I started putting cameras inside the boxes in 2004. Inside of a nesting box, you can't see what's going on in there unless you have a camera in there. So with a camera in there, I was able to monitor 24 hours a day what was happening. And sometimes it was 2 females in the same box fighting over who's going to get this box. Sometimes, here's the hatching day with the female and all the little ones. And maybe as crowded as that is, that might be why she wants out of there. It's the morning after hatching that she's going to pop up in the doorway like that, look around, and when it's safe, she's going to drop to the ground. And then they start coming. And to be able to see that and film it every year and watching, these ducklings leap to the ground, doing belly flops, back flips, whatever it happens to be. And having, being able to share that with kids too, and have them sitting in the blinds to see it as well. There she is gathering them up off the ground. Okay, and then again, writing about it. And when I wrote about this and saw the connection between the writing and the photography, all of a sudden a new area started coming in. How can I get kids not only to take pictures, but to tie in some writing, some nature writing with it? So I put together a session for young author conferences around the state of Minnesota. I'm not some famous author. Most of the people at these conferences are very well-known authors or illustrators or artists. I wasn't. I'm just an ordinary guy that wants to be with kids. But I wrote this and no one else was doing what I was doing. So everybody that was setting up these conferences said, it sounds like a great idea, let's do it. And the sessions were always full. But it was connecting, blending the photography and the writing together. It might have been, and this is what I call it, writing about nature through the eyes of a wildlife photographer. It might have been journaling outside. Or it might have been dealing with something as simple as dialogue boxes, where the kids could fill in what is being said here. And there's no wrong answer. That's the great thing about it. It might have been, remember the old Verizon commercial? Can you hear me now? That's exactly what hit me when I saw this first. Or it might have been something called an ABC poem. Just a word, in sequence in the alphabet. It doesn't have to start with A. It can be any word. But a brazen chipmunk definitely eats food greedily. Or a haiku. 3 mushrooms standing like forest floor sentinels. Watch the snake go by. 575. So kids could get involved with simple things like this, with pictures that I supplied, or hopefully the goal was for having them take their own pictures and then do the writing with them. This student of mine stopped when we're on a hike, and he said, Mr. Monk, look at this. The picture tells the story, but I couldn't help it. I still had to add. I found that hungry beaver had been chewing on a tree. Wood chips were scattered on the ground for all the world to see. I can't believe they taste good. They must be rather dry. But I had to find out for myself. So I just gave them a try. So again, it doesn't have to be a long, flowery poem, but the words can fit the picture. But a granddaughter that a handful of years ago lived in Iowa, and she went to a street fair and got painted up like a butterfly, and she sent me the picture and said, Grandpa, I'm a butterfly. I couldn't pass up the opportunity. Although the miles between us can keep you from my sight, I think of you each morning and pray for you each time. Your photo's right beside me, and I see through your disguise. I know it's you who's hiding behind your butterfly eyes. So again, how students could take a photo, maybe even a photo that they didn't take themselves, but somehow have the words connect to the photo, tying them together. I also had time to get back to the love I have for loons. That started here at Camp Wilderness. In the mid-60s, a handful of us took the canoes from down at the beach area with permission, and we paddled the length of Bad Axe, portage across into Mantrap, and spent the day going through all the bays of Mantrap, fishing along the way. And as the day ended, we did not come back to Camp Wilderness. We ended up, as the sun was setting, we found an island, an uninhabited island on Mantrap, and that's where we camped for the night. We didn't bring tents. So after we cooked a few northerns that we caught and had those for supper, we just propped our canoes up against the trees and laid underneath the canoes for the night. The moon was out, the geese were flying and making noise. We were right there with nature. A beaver was slapping his tail on the surface, and loons were calling. It's the first time I remember hearing that sound, because where I grew up in west central Minnesota, we didn't have loons on those lakes. And that hooked me. I saw the loons in the morning. There were 3 of them, and I didn't understand at the time, later I did, that it was a pair of loons and an intruder. That extra male had ideas of dating the female, but the resident male didn't want any part of that. So a fight pursued and a chase, and the new male was chased off. That behavior fascinated me, and I wanted to learn more about it. My problem was we had to canoe back to Camp Wilderness. I had to go home at the end of the week, finish my schooling, go to college, get a job teaching up in Thief River and then in Moorhead. Deb and I were married up in Itasca State Park. This area of the state has always been an area we love. And in 1976, we moved back to Park Rapids, where I taught for the next 30 years. So within 10 or 12 miles of Camp Wilderness, I was able to become a loon volunteer on Mantrap Lake, where we have a huge conservation project going since the mid-'80s. Carol Henderson said it is the gold standard for loon conservation. We put out 20 nesting rafts each spring. They're made of aluminum. not PVC pipe or logs. We started with that way back when, but we are with aluminum rafts. This is a Type A raft, a big heavy one, so it's out in open water where the wind might get to it a little bit more. Here's a Type B, a flatter, lower style raft in the protected areas. The reason for the rafts is most natural nests by shore get predated. Raccoons and skunks find the eggs. By putting the raft out from shore, our success rate has gone way, way up. And so I spend a lot of time with the camera, photographing a loon laying an egg. Here are the black flies. Look how thick they are. One of the limiting factors for loons during the nesting season. Sometimes they are so annoying that a loon will actually abandon the nest and the eggs, and that's just to get relief. Here's a raccoon raiding one of the nests. Here's our trail camera work, 24 hours a day monitoring. And here's the result the next morning. That's what's left of the egg. Okay? So, I'm also there on hatching days, sitting at a safe distance in a blind, long lens, photographing the chicks as they hatch. We've been able to help 3 different videographer groups, 2 from National Geographic and 1 from Smithsonian, that have been here since 2017 and 2019 and then this last spring. And we do all the legwork ahead of time for them. So when they get here, they know which nests are about ready to hatch, what ones do this and that, and it's just great to work with them and let them do the work and just be in the background. One morning when I was with Matt in our boat, I happened to see a loon that looked like it was acting a little strange, so I said, we've got to go look. And here's what we saw. A steel eater was wrapped around the back of it. And then as it raised up and flapped its wings, I saw the huge plug underneath it. It had somehow gotten caught in a fisherman's lure. So a rescue had to take place. Part again of our conservation efforts. You know, this morning we listened to Joe as Teddy Roosevelt. And I keyed in on a couple of Teddy Roosevelt quotes about conservation. There can be no greater issue than that of conservation in this country. Life is a great adventure, accepted such as here. Let's try to do. Rachel Carson said, if a child is to keep his inborn sense of wonder, he needs, or she, the companionship of at least one adult who can share rediscovering with him the joy, the excitement, and the mystery of the world we live in. I was fortunate enough to have some great mentors when I was growing up. My dad introduced me to nature through fishing and hunting. My grandfather through photography. My biology teacher with all the nature studies. And our scout leader that brought us up here to Camp Wilderness each summer was the studio photographer in Benson. So the photography merit badge was a must. We had to get that. But I owe them for that. And in my trying to give back, I try to be a mentor as much as I can. So a lot of it started right here with these merit badges. And as I started out, helping others make connections to nature, that's what I tried to do because of the scouting experiences along the way. Helping others make the connection because a bird in the hand is worth, remember what the old saying is? A bird in the hand is worth 2 in the bush. 2 in the bush, that's the old saying. The new saying is, a bird in the hand is worth the lasting memory it creates. Okay. See the look on his face. That's what connecting to nature can do with kids. And it also makes for lasting friendships. 3 of the other guys that I spent those weeks here at Camp Wilderness with in the summers back in the 1960s and winter weekends up here too. We still get together and fish every summer. Okay, I start out by saying from life to eagle, fairly well-defined path. From eagle onto life, maybe not as fine, but back to that first question. Will the paths I take and the decisions I make be influenced by my years in scouting? For myself, I think I can answer definitely. Where will scouting take you? What merit badges or the scouting experience will become a permanent part of your life? That's a question that only each person can answer. Let scouting help you discover your passion and find ways to share it with others. That's all I have. Thank you.
right, are you ready? Okay. My name is Brad Olson. I first came to camp here in 1986 as a Cub Scout. That summer that I was here, stayed in cabin, it was either 6 or 7 over here. I was having issues closing the windows over there, and so I tried to force it with my wrist or whatever, and I shattered the window and I have a nice little scar on my hand now. So that was my first experience coming to camp, was that. Chris originally asked me to talk about the 80s and the time that I was here there. I brought a few other things with too, since I spent a little bit more time here at camp, but one of the big things that I remember for me growing up as a scout and where this place really has just changed my life. I came here a couple years in a row for Cub Scout camp in the summertime, and back then it was a few days and you go home. And I think most all of you that are sitting here right now have experienced that. When I got to the point where I crossed over into the scout troop, most of my friends had quit scouting at that point. And I decided I didn't want to be in Scouts anymore as well, because if my friends weren't going to be anymore, why would I want to be in it at that point? And I remember it was about 2 weeks before the troop was supposed to go to summer camp. Ed Jansen, who was my scoutmaster at the time, came over to my house, and we sat down and we visited for a while and talked about coming to camp. And my mom's sitting here right now as well, and so she probably remembers that too. And after we were done talking, we decided, all right, I'll give camp a try. We'll see what happens, right? So, and again, because I was kind of late and I wasn't planning to go to camp that year, back then you had to have skill awards to come to camp. Well, I hadn't earned any skill awards yet because I wasn't really doing stuff with the troop at the time. So I went to go take swimming merit badge. Well, you have to have the swimming skill award before you could take the merit badge, so I didn't have that. And again, all these different classes I wanted to take, I didn't have a skill award for it. So the only class that I had signed up for when I got to camp that I could still actually take was fishing. So the first merit badge I earned here at camp was fishing merit badge. But it was from that experience here at camp that made me feel like scouting was going to be for me and I was going to be part of it until the end, which is why I'm still standing here today. I did bring a bunch of pictures. I don't know how many people have handed out pictures, but if you want to see some pictures from old days of camp, you guys can hand those around if you want. I know earlier John had talked a little bit about the woodshed building back here and also the old outdoor shower building. If any of you guys remember the old outdoor shower building, here's some pictures of the demolition of that. If you want to see that coming down, I've got those. I've also got a few pictures here as well of the log pavilion being built. And so if you guys want to kind of just stand around, you guys can just pass pictures around and take a look at them. And then this photo book was when I was a little kid. This was actually from the 80s. But there's pictures in here, and I think they might actually come. But I told Chris Spivak and Ken Larson that there's pictures of them wrestling in one of the campsites and everything. So that's some of the pictures as well. But so for me, ever coming here in the 80s was very memorable. In 1990, when I came here with my troop, we stayed in Crow Campsite, and the last night that we were here was me and Ben McCormick. We stayed in the same tent together, and all week long in our tent was a slit. The screen was broken. We never fixed it all week long. Well, that Saturday morning, a skunk decided to come in our tent. Now, he walked between Ben and I, we woke up, it was like 6 o'clock in the morning, and he got out at some point, never sprayed us. Now, to us, he was in there probably for hours, right? I'm sure he was probably in there for a couple minutes or whatever, but we had camp packed up, we were ready to go home. And that was the last night that I camped here as a scout. And then after that, in 1991, I started working here as a counselor in training. And so, when John Fike was talking earlier about how the camp needed a lot of help at that point, right? We were at a point here where we had Camp Wilderness was going, Metagoshi was going at the same time. That was the last summer that both those two camps ran for summer camp. And I got to be here on that first year here. And one of the stories I remember, if you have the commemorative book, one of the pieces in the commemorative book, because I got to help be the narrator throughout the book itself, was I remember when I worked on Scoutcrafts then, that at the end of the week with Pioneering, we actually had to unravel all of the Pioneering projects and save the twine so we could use it again for the next week, because we didn't have the funding to be able to even buy a roll of twine. Like John was talking about buying chainsaws and all that kind of stuff. It was like, no, you can't do any of that stuff. Again, that's where we were at as a staff at that point. And so there's a piece of twine that goes through that whole book, and that was supposed to be the fabric or whatever of what camp was to help bring camp to where it is today. So in those early years that I was on staff, obviously I was a younger kid who'd ever worked in the waterfront and worked my way up to the black building. I got paid to tan for 6 years, as I like to call it. So, and then I was asked to be the program director for the camp. Did that for 3 years, and then in 2000 I got to be the camp director, and that was going to be my last summer here at camp. And graduated from college, was going to go do camp one more last summer, kind of one last hurrah before I had to get a real job, right? It was like I graduated, now I had to go do that. Well, at that time, I had come to the meeting here, and again, John mentioned it, like, I don't know how I ended up in the Fox building in that planning meeting as a kid, but somehow I ended up in that meeting where we were talking about the future of the camp. And it was in December, it was a cold day, I remember that, but they started asking lots of questions there, and they wanted me to get some scouts input, because the adults were talking about what is the future and what is the vision of this camp, and I got to sit in that meeting. So after that initial point was, springboarded me on the staff, but one of the things from that meeting was that at some point they wanted to add a year-round camp director to this camp. And so at the beginning of the summer of 2000, I had graduated. I knew that I was going to move to Minneapolis, because that's what everyone does, right? Everyone moves to the big city, right? And we can't live at home anymore. So I was moving to Minneapolis, and like I said, at the beginning of the summer, I told John Fike, I'm like, in the long range plan for camp, you talked about having a year-round camp director out here. You should just hire me. And I was kind of half joking a little bit because I didn't have a job yet. And he's like, well, it wasn't like this, you could just do something like that. Well, as we got through the rest of that summer, got to the end of July, he comes up to me and he's like, so went and talked to the executive board and got permission to hire you on full time. So we're going to hire you on as a year-round camp director for camp. He's like, I know that's a few years earlier than what we wanted to do that, but we want you to start being out here and running camp. And so at that point, for me, we had summer program here, and we had a winter program. And for those of you who came here in winter camp, it was you just rented a cabin. Yep. There was no winter program itself, other than you provided your own program. You had to put the wood in the potbelly stove, or figure out the setting on the burner, the LP gas ones over here in these cabins, and they were like exactly how hot. I'd get too hot in there, and 2 o'clock in the morning you were sweating, or it was too cold, and you're shivering in your tent. But so my job was tasked to grow camp. And it's been fun over those years to see camp go from where things were to where camp is now, from capital campaigns to help remodel the buildings here, to build buildings like this. For a lot of us, we remember the big old towers that were sitting behind cabin 16, and that the towers were filled when the water was shooting over the top of it, then you had to go turn the valve off. That was the only way you could tell if it was full. The only way you knew it was empty is if you were taking a shower and all of a sudden at 11 o'clock at night you ran out of water, because there was no water left in the tank, and you were trying to find somebody to go turn it back on so you could finish getting the soap off you, right? But again, so just to think that there's 10,000 gallons of water all in a pressurized system behind us here, that came from that. Remodeling countless buildings here in the camp, adding new programs, at one point we had 2 more full-time people here. So not only do we have our ranger here at camp, but we also had a full-time cook, and we had another full-time camp person here. And so to see the camp grow to that point it was phenomenal. And I know that there's still a lot of great things going on here at camp. Since I've been done, Tom took over and did a great job of keeping things going. I applaud Missy and everything that she's done over the last 2 years here, especially with COVID. And I know we're not out of it yet, but the fact that we've been able to still have camp here and that you've been able to run camp is tremendous for all the kids. Because especially last year, so many camps didn't even try to do summer camp last year. But we did here, which is phenomenal. So I'm very fortunate to have had a very good career in scouting so far. I know I'm no longer here in the Northern Alliance Council with all of you guys, but I live the closest I've ever lived to camp, and I'm in a different council now. But I'm also very blessed to still be employed by the Scouts and working for the Voyageurs Area Council up in Bemidji, and still keeping scouting alive and being so close here to be able to come down to camp and spend time here on a regular basis. So. It's been a lot of fun to see all the improvements to camp. And the time that I was here as camp director, the reservation director for camp, we put $5.5 million back into the camp between projects, remodeling buildings, adding new things. And just to be part of all those processes, to build the Cub Scout camp, to remember that that was a vision at one point and just a big pile of dirt out there. And I remember too, when all of a sudden things were really going well with all the raising of the funds for that camp. I remember Ron Schneider and I got together at Buffalo Wild Wings one night, and we're like, okay, because Ron was the property chair at the time for the camp, and we're like, okay, we got to start coming up with a conceptual plan or whatever for what this camp's going to look like, because they're actually raising lots of money now. We need to get this figured out, because we're going to hopefully start building soon. And somewhere in my house, and I got to find it, I have the bar napkin that we used to originally start drawing out what we thought the layout of the camp was going to look like. Now we probably went through a couple different napkins before we got to the one that we actually ended up keeping. But again, you know, that's where the original conceptual drawing came from, what we currently have out there now. And you know, very thankful whatever for people like Mark Holtz and our council for all the things you know, his leadership over those years, to take a council when he came in here whatever that was not doing good financially at all, and to help turn things around whatever and make things go out here, all the capital campaigns that we've done, not only for Camp Wilderness but also for, you know, Center for Scouting that's in Fargo. I know, you know, just to see the growth of this council over those years has just been phenomenal. But at the heart of all of that, though, it's all of you guys, all of you that are sitting here right now. It's all the scouts that come here to camp. I know Justin talked about it earlier today. I don't know that in all the years of this camp, and no matter what buildings get built out here and what fancy things are here, at the heart of everything is the staff. It's their excitement for being here. It's their fortitude for making sure that the programs go. It's the countless hours that they put in to make sure that the scouts have a great time. And it doesn't matter what facilities you have. I mean, obviously we're very fortunate for what we've got here, but if it's not the staff that's here, and obviously you can see that with all the people that have come back this weekend to help make camp go, that's the heart and soul of this place. And so thank you guys very much for coming. Thank you guys for being here, being a part of Camp Wilderness, and hopefully you guys can enjoy some of the old school pictures I've taken over my years. I know, yes, I wasn't the best photographer. There's thumbprints on some of them, and so forth. But thank you guys very much for being part of the Camp Wilderness family.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, hello everyone. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Missy Hendricks, formerly Missy Polda. I got married last October. I am currently the Northern Lights Council Camping Director. I was asked to talk a little bit about the 2020s, but I'm just going to start with a little bit on how I became to where I am right now. I first started coming down to Camp Wilderness with Holy Cross Catholic Church Group out of West Fargo, North Dakota, back in 2006 and 2007. I came for 2 years. And then I got convinced to come out here and work at camp, so I started working out here when I was 15. My mother still asks, why did I drop a 15-year-old girl off at a camp? But Brad Olson actually hired me on, and I'm very thankful for that. If it wasn't for Brad having the faith in me to do this, I wouldn't be where I am right now. So I started in the trading post. I was a trading post clerk in 2008. I then went over to the fishing area. That's where my heart is. I was the fishing aide, worked up to fishing director. My last summer, 2011, and then I went off to college and I took 2 years off. And then I knew that I needed camp. I needed to come back. This is my family here. This is just where I really wanted to be. And so I came back in 2014 as a program director. No, I did 1 year as fishing director, just kidding, 1 year as fishing director. And then I did 2 years as program director, about 3 years as camp director. And now here I am. I became a district executive with the Northern Lights Council in 2019. And then last year, 2020, when Tom Berry left, I got asked to take over his position. So it's been a long journey here at Camp Wilderness, and I'm just so thankful because I have this place that I get to call my home, and I have met so many incredible, incredible people. I've got to see and be part of so many amazing things out here too, from the building of the new campfire area to adding new programs, new patch designs, and all that fun stuff too. And then 2020 was probably the hardest year that I ever had to work on Camp staff. So I was a district executive, and then I was also the camp director. And when COVID hit, when the pandemic hit, we were determined to run camp. We're going to do it, heck or high water. We are running camp no matter what. And the hoops that we had to go through, and talking with the Minnesota Department of Health, and creating our business plans, and revamping our schedule on how everything was going to work. It was probably about 2 weeks before camp, and Tom and I looked at each other and we're like, we can't do this. Like, this is going to be hard, especially outdoors, 90 to 100 degrees, staff wearing masks, campers wearing masks. We're like, we can't do this. But then we're like, no, we can do this. Everyone's shutting down. Let's make this happen. So 2020, we ran 5 weeks of summer camp, Scouts BSA, and we also ran Cub Camp too. And it was hard. We only had about 545 Scouts BSA members come through, and only about 160 Cubs come through. So it's probably our lowest attendance in a very, very long time. So it was hard working with Brad and watching the camp build, like he was talking about, build it to this great thing, and then I felt like it just kind of plummeted in 2020. But that's what happens with the pandemic. So we're currently in the rebuilding phase. But in 2020, out of the 420 Scout camps in the United States, only 60 of them operated, and we were one of them, with 0 cases of COVID-19. So we're very, very proud of ourselves. COVID forced us to adapt, change, and overcome what we thought was the impossible. We completely revamped our merit badge schedule and how we look at camp. We were pretty much given a blank canvas and guidelines and tried to mesh them all together. So last summer was our first summer that we ran block scheduling. For those that don't know what block scheduling is basically you have a 4-hour time block. So we did 2 hours, like 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours in the afternoon, and you would earn that merit badge in that 4-hour time block in one day. Instead of going for an hour over 5 days, we brought it down to about 4 hours in one day. So the Scouts actually walked out with 6 merit badges, which is 1 more than usual. And then we did 2 days, Wednesdays and Fridays, of our adventure days, which is like a normal troop activity day. So then going into 2021, we were set on, we are running a normal schedule. We're going to allow people to go wherever they want to go. We're going to be able to intermix everyone. We're going to be able to have a great time out at camp. And then we weren't allowed to do that either. So 2021 came, and we had everything planned as normal, and then we had to tighten our restrictions again. So we ran our pod. 2020 was called the pod system, but pod has such a negative term to it, so then we turned it into a bubble system, because bubbles are fun and you can float around and be like fun. So we're like, this bubble is floating over to Fishing and then to the waterfront. So we ran that again this year, and it was successful. We ran another camping season officially. Now 2 camping seasons with 0 cases of COVID-19. So it's incredible, and I couldn't have done it with all of the wonderful staff that we had last year, this year, and then all of the staff that help us are in our alumni association, our camping association, our camping committee, risk management, everyone there. They helped us tremendously. But looking to the future of Camp Wilderness, that's right now is the $1 million question. We made the decision that we're going back to the basics of camping. COVID has been a lot of online, looking at computer screens, Zoom calls, phone calls. We haven't had our Scouts be able to get really out in the outdoors much, except for the 1 week that they get to come to camp. So moving forward to 2022, we're going to be going back to the basics of camp. We talked about getting rid of some of our electronic merit badges where everyone is inside, and we're going back to those camping skills, waterfront skills, fishing skills, things like that. And then when we go into your individual districts in the Northern Lights Council, we'll be offering those citizenship classes and all of that, all of those types of courses as well. We'll be offering during the off season or during winter camp. But again, we are just given a blank canvas for next year and how we're going to run, and we're not quite sure yet. We're going to go through all of our closing reports, and we're going to pull a bunch of directors together, and we're going to have a vision meeting on what do you envision Camp Wilderness to look like? How do you envision our schedules to look like? And what do we really want to see happen? And how do we really want to run? And how do we really want to operate? So it's pretty exciting. A lot of the things that we had to do because of COVID, we're going to continue to do moving forward, like our check-in processes, and like swim tests and all that kind of stuff too that we had to change because of COVID. We're just going to continue to use that. So some of the changes are actually really good. Some other future plans for Camp Wilderness. Our next big project that we're working on is renovating the Black Building. All of those plans are up in the dining hall. They're also up in the Black Building right now. So we're very excited about that. I got to sit down and be part of that planning committee on what do you see, Missy? I'm like, oh, well, I've spent 8 years. There's nights I slept on the tables in the Black Building during the middle of storms, and I've slept in that building many times, or I go to bed at 1 o'clock and then I'm up at 1:30 because a storm is coming in. Like, what do I envision of this building, and what do we want to see, and what's going to be the most functional for that? So that's why we created the plans that we created. So we're going to try and keep that building as close to the original model as we possibly can, but just kind of give it a facelift and give it an upgrade. We're also working on funding for a skills trade center down at close to Andy's shop that will have like auto mechanics, welding, those different skill trades that we'll be able to offer, and then bring in school groups to help use those too. And then our third project that we're going to be working on is funding for the docks, because we need new docks down at the waterfront, and all of that information is over in the Black Building as well. So I'm very excited to see the future of camp and where it's going to go. So yeah, I think that's about all that I have. If there's anyone who has any questions, but thank you all so much. Yeah.
What about the role of girls in Cub Scouts and Boy Scouts? Do we see the camp as a big draw for them?
Yeah, so we actually have female units that come out, and we haven't really had any issues with girls coming into scouting because they've been part of Scouting with Venture Scouts for many years now. So they all have the same mission and purpose of being out here, but attendance has increased. I think we actually had more our female Cub Scouts this year than we did males. So we have a lot of them come out, and it's great for families too. Yeah.
But you're a great role model of the role of women in scouting at all levels.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been a journey, that's for sure. It's been a lot of fun, and I know without Brad standing behind me and backing me up and helping me through this and believing in me, I wouldn't still be standing up here within this position that I am today, so I'm very thankful. But thank you all so much for coming out this weekend too. I really appreciated it, and I'm excited to see what the future holds with camp.